When the stagecoach pulled away without her, Eva Merritt knew she'd reached the end of everything. Her money, her hope, her very last chance. The town of Willow Junction stretched before her like a graveyard of dreams, and the faces in the windows held nothing but judgment for a widow traveling alone. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and night was falling fast. But then a scarred stranger with tired eyes offered the one thing she'd lost faith in: mercy. If you're watching this story unfold, drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far Eva's journey travels across the world. And stay with us until the very end, because what starts as survival becomes something neither of them expected. The wind hit Eva Merritt's face like a slap the moment she stepped down from the stagecoach. Her worn carpet bag clutched against her chest as if it contained all the treasures in the world instead of 3 dresses, a broken pocket watch, and the last 17 cents to her name. The November cold cut through her traveling coat, the good wool one she'd bought back when her husband Thomas was still alive, back when the world made sense, and she pulled it tighter, watching the stagecoach driver haul down the last of the luggage. "That's everything, ma'am," he said without looking at her, his tone flat and final. "Wait." Eva's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Wait. I'm supposed to continue on to Silver Creek. My ticket, axle's cracked." The driver spat tobacco juice into the dust. "We're done for today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after. Depends on the blacksmith. But I don't have—" She stopped herself, pride clamping down on the words, "I don't have money for a hotel." Pride was about all she had left, and she wasn't ready to surrender it. Not yet. "How long will the repairs take?" The driver finally looked at her, and his eyes held the particular brand of indifference that Eva had come to know well in the 6 months since Thomas died. It was the look that said, "Your problems aren't my problems." The look that said, "You're on your own now." "Like I said, ma'am, could be tomorrow, could be longer." He climbed back up onto the driver's seat. "There's a hotel on Main Street. Mrs. Crowley's boarding house if you're looking for something cheaper." The stagecoach pulled away, wheels crunching on the hard-packed dirt, leaving Eva standing alone in the middle of Willow Junction with her carpet bag and her 17 cents, and the sinking certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake. The town wasn't much to look at, a single main street lined with weathered buildings, their paint peeling in the constant wind that seemed to blow straight across the plains without mercy. A general store, a saloon, what looked like a feed and grain supply, and at the far end, a white church steeple rising against the gray November sky, like a finger pointing toward a god who seemed to have forgotten all about Eva Merritt. She stood there for a long moment, trying to decide what to do. The hotel was out of the question. She'd stayed in enough of them on the journey west to know that even the cheapest room would cost more than she had. The boarding house might be possible, but boarding houses asked questions, wanted references, expected payment in advance. A woman emerged from the general store, saw Eva standing there, and quickly averted her eyes. Eva recognized that look too. It was the look that said, "Respectable women don't travel alone." The look that asked without words, what kind of woman leaves her home with nothing but a carpet bag? What kind of woman shows up in a strange town with no husband, no family, no connections? The kind of woman whose husband died in a Missouri mining accident, leaving nothing but debts. The kind of woman whose in-laws blamed her for their son's death, who made it clear she wasn't welcome in their home or their town or anywhere near the memories of the man she'd loved. The kind of woman who'd heard about opportunities out west, about Silver Creek, where her cousin Martha supposedly ran a successful dressmaking shop and had written once, years ago, that there would always be a place for family. The kind of woman who was starting to suspect that Martha's address was outdated, that the promised help might be as substantial as smoke, and that she'd traded one impossible situation for another. Eva picked up her bag and started walking. She didn't have a destination in mind, just a vague sense that standing still would invite more stares, more judgment. Her feet carried her down Main Street, past the saloon, where men's voices spilled out into the afternoon along with the smell of whiskey and tobacco. Past the feed store, where a group of ranch hands leaned against the hitching post, their conversation stopping as she passed. "Well now," one of them said, loud enough to carry. "Looks like someone got left behind." Laughter followed her down the street. The boarding house sat at the end of a side street, a 2-story building with a neat picket fence and lace curtains in the windows. A hand-painted sign read, "Mrs. Crowley's Rooms, respectable ladies only. Eva stood at the gate for a full minute, gathering her courage, before pushing it open and walking up the front steps. The woman who answered her knock was thin and sharp-featured, with gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her eyes traveled from Eva's dusty traveling coat to her worn boots and back up again, taking inventory, making calculations. "Yes?" "Good afternoon." Eva forced her voice to stay steady, to sound confident. "I'm looking for a room, just for a night or two, until the stagecoach is repaired." "We require a week's payment in advance," Mrs. Crowley said. $2. $2 might as well have been 200. "I see. The thing is, cash only, no credit extended." Mrs. Crowley's expression didn't change, didn't soften. "Breakfast included, supper costs extra. No male visitors, no drinking, no smoking, church attendance expected on Sundays." "I'm afraid I don't have $2, Eva said, and the admission felt like pulling out her own teeth. "The stagecoach broke down unexpectedly, and I wasn't prepared for I'm sorry, but I can't help you." Mrs. Crowley was already closing the door. "There are other accommodations in town. Good day." The door clicked shut, and Eva stood there on the porch, staring at the painted wood, feeling something hard and bitter rising in her throat. She wanted to knock again, to explain that she wasn't asking for charity, that she was a good woman, a respectable widow who'd just had a string of bad luck. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Mrs. Crowley had made her assessment in those first 5 seconds, and nothing Eva said would change it. She walked back toward Main Street as the afternoon light began to fade. The November sun hung low and pale, offering no warmth, only the promise of a cold night ahead. Eva's mind raced through possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. Sleep in the church? They'd call the sheriff. Sleep in the livery stable? Same result. Sleep in the alley behind the general store? The thought made her stomach turn. But what choice did she have? She was so lost in her spiraling thoughts that she almost walked straight into the man coming out of the general store. He stopped short, steadying a crate of supplies in his arms, and Eva stumbled back with a quick apology. "Excuse me, I wasn't—" She looked up, and the words died in her throat. The man was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a work-worn coat, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water. But it was the scar that drew her attention, a thick, jagged line that ran from his left ear down across his jaw, pulling one corner of his mouth into a permanent, slight twist. The kind of scar that spoke of violence, of pain, of a story that probably didn't have a happy ending. He looked at her with those creek water eyes, and Eva saw something she hadn't seen in any other face since she'd arrived in Willow Junction. He actually saw her, not as a nuisance or a scandal or something to be avoided, but as a person, a human being in trouble. "You're the woman from the stagecoach," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Eva lifted her chin, trying to hold on to her dignity. "The one who got left behind." He nodded slowly, shifting the crate in his arms. "Where are you staying?" Eva hesitated, pride warring with desperation. "I'm working on that." Something flickered across his face, understanding maybe, or recognition. "The boarding house turn you away?" There was no point in lying. "I don't have enough money." "Hotel?" "Same problem." He was quiet for a moment, studying her in a way that made Eva want to look away, but somehow couldn't. Then he nodded, as if coming to a decision. "Ma'am, no one sleeps out in this weather." He shifted the crate again, gesturing with his head toward a wagon hitched at the rail. "Come on." Eva blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "I've got a cabin about 8 miles out. Extra blankets, warm fire. You can stay until the stagecoach is fixed." He said it matter-of-factly, as if offering shelter to strange women was something he did every day. "Name's Silas Boone." For a moment, Eva couldn't speak. Every instinct that had been drilled into her since childhood screamed that this was improper, dangerous, scandalous. A woman didn't go off alone with a strange man, didn't accept such intimate charity. It was the kind of thing that ruined reputations, that made people whisper and point and draw conclusions. But then again, what reputation did she have left to protect? And what choice did she have? Freeze to death in an alley, or accept help from a scarred stranger with kind eyes? Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Why would you help me? Silas Boone looked at her for a long moment, and something ancient and sad flickered in his expression. Because somebody should have helped you already, and nobody did. He turned toward the wagon. It's up to you, ma'am, but night's coming, and the temperature's dropping fast. Eva looked back down Main Street, at the buildings with their closed doors and drawn curtains, at the people who had looked right through her or laughed at her predicament. She thought about her 17 cents, about the cold wind cutting through her coat, about Thomas and the promises they'd made to each other that death had rendered meaningless. Then she picked up her carpet bag and followed Silas Boone to his wagon. The bed of the wagon was nearly full with supplies: flour sacks, sugar, coffee, nails, bolts of fabric, ammunition. Silas loaded his crate among the rest, then turned to take Eva's bag, placing it carefully in a dry spot near the front. He offered his hand to help her up onto the seat, his grip firm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. "Thank you," Eva said quietly as she settled onto the wooden bench. Silas just nodded, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. He made a soft clicking sound, and the horses, two sturdy bays that looked as work-worn as their owner, started forward at an easy walk. Willow Junction fell away behind them as they headed out onto the open prairie. The land stretched flat and endless in all directions, brown grass bending in the wind, the sky huge and gray overhead. Eva had grown up in Missouri, where the hills rolled gentle and the trees grew thick, where the world felt contained and knowable. This prairie openness unsettled her, made her feel small and exposed, like an ant crawling across an infinite table. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the steady clip-clop of hooves, and the eternal prairie wind. Eva tried not to stare at the man beside her, but she couldn't help stealing glances. He sat easy in the seat, reins loose in his hands, his scarred face turned slightly toward the horizon. There was something solid about him, something steady, as if the wind that bent the grass and shook the wagon couldn't move him an inch. "You headed to Silver Creek?" Silas asked eventually, his voice low and rough, as if he didn't use it much. "Yes, I have family there. A cousin." "Long way from Missouri." Eva glanced at him sharply. "How did you know—" "Your accent." The corner of his mouth quirked up slightly, the unscarred side. "Also, you mentioned it to the stagecoach driver." "Oh." Eva felt foolish. "Yes, long way, but there wasn't anything left for me in Missouri after my husband passed." "I'm sorry." And he said it like he meant it, like those two words carried actual weight instead of being the empty social pleasantry she'd heard 100 times. "Thank you." Eva pulled her coat tighter against the wind. "What about you, Mr. Boone? Have you lived out here long?" 5 years. Came out from Pennsylvania after—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "After things changed. Bought the land, built the cabin, run cattle, some horses. It's a living." There was clearly more to the story, but Eva didn't push. She understood about things left unsaid, about chapters of your life you'd rather not discuss with strangers. They rode on as the sun sank lower, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. The beauty of it caught Eva by surprise, the way the light touched the grass, the vast sweep of sky, the sense of being utterly alone in the world, yet somehow part of something bigger. She'd spent so much time afraid, so much time grieving and worrying and trying to figure out how to survive the next day that she'd forgotten to notice things like sunsets. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Silas glanced at her, then back at the horizon. "It grows on you. Most people hate it at first, too empty, too quiet. But after a while—" He trailed off, but Eva thought she understood. After a while, the emptiness became a kind of freedom. The quiet became peace. The cabin appeared as the last light was fading from the sky. A low structure of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch. It sat in a slight depression near a line of cottonwood trees, and Eva could hear the sound of running water, a creek or small river nearby. There was a barn set back behind the house, a chicken coop, and a corral where several horses stood watching their approach with mild interest. "It's not much," Silas said, pulling the wagon to a stop near the porch, "but it's warm and dry." It's perfect, Eva said, and meant it. After a day of rejection and judgment, after hours of not knowing where she would sleep or how she would survive, the simple cabin looked like salvation. Silas helped her down from the wagon, then grabbed her carpet bag along with several of his supply bundles. "I'll get you settled inside, then see to the horses," he said, leading the way up onto the porch. The interior of the cabin was dim, smelling of wood smoke and coffee, and something else Eva couldn't quite identify. Leather, maybe? Or the particular scent of a place lived in by a solitary man. Silas lit a kerosene lamp and warm light spread across a single large room. It was sparse but not uncomfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a worn leather chair positioned nearby. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat near the kitchen area, just a simple counter with a dry sink, a wood-burning stove, and open shelves holding tin plates and cups. A bed stood against the far wall, covered with a patchwork quilt that looked like it had seen many winters, and that was all. No decorations, no personal touches, nothing that spoke of joy or comfort beyond the purely functional. It was the loneliest room Eva had ever seen. "I know it's not what you're used to," Silas said, setting down the supplies and moving to light a fire in the hearth. "But, like I said, it's warm. Mr. Boone, I can't take your bed," Eva said quickly. "I'm already imposing on your hospitality. I can sleep on the floor, or you'll sleep by the fire." Silas cut her off, not unkindly, as he coaxed the kindling into flame. "I'll bring in some extra blankets. It's comfortable enough." He worked efficiently, building up the fire until it crackled and popped, heat beginning to fill the space. Then he grabbed a worn wool blanket from a chest near the bed and spread it on the floor near the hearth, adding another rolled blanket for a pillow. "There." He straightened, dusting off his hands. "Not fancy, but you won't freeze. I need to tend the animals. There's coffee in the pot on the stove if you want to heat it up. Help yourself to anything you need." He was halfway to the door before Eva found her voice. "Mr. Boone, Silas, I don't know how to thank you for bringing me here, for—" "No need to thank me." He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Like I said, somebody should have helped you. I'm just glad I could." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Eva stood alone in the warm cabin with tears suddenly burning in her eyes. She'd been holding herself together all day, through the stagecoach breaking down, through the rejection at the boarding house, through the humiliating awareness that she had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. But now, in this moment of unexpected kindness from a scarred stranger, something inside her cracked. She sank down onto the blanket by the fire and let herself cry. Not the pretty, delicate tears that women were supposed to cry, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone who'd been holding on too tight for too long. She cried for Thomas, for the life they'd planned that would never happen. She cried for the last 6 months of struggle and loneliness and desperate attempts to keep going when everything felt impossible. And she cried from sheer relief that for tonight, at least, she was safe and warm and didn't have to figure out how to survive the next hour. By the time Silas returned, she'd pulled herself together, wiping her face with her hands and taking deep, steadying breaths. She heard his footsteps on the porch, heard him stamping the dust from his boots before he entered. When he came in, carrying a bucket of water from the creek, she'd managed to compose her face into something approaching calm. If he noticed that her eyes were red, he didn't mention it. "Thought you might want to wash up," he said, setting the bucket near the dry sink along with a clean cloth. "Water's cold, but it's clean." "Thank you." Eva stood, brushing off her skirt. "I heated the coffee like you said. Would you like some?" "That'd be good." They moved around each other carefully in the small space, Eva pouring coffee into tin cups while Silas put away the supplies he'd bought in town. There was something almost domestic about it, she thought, this quiet coordination of 2 people sharing a space. It reminded her of the early days with Thomas, when they'd been newly married and still learning how to exist together. Silas settled into the chair by the fire with his coffee, and Eva took one of the chairs at the table. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. After a while, Eva spoke. "The scar on your face, how did it happen?" She regretted the question immediately. It was too personal, too intrusive. But Silas just took a sip of his coffee and stared into the fire. "Horse threw me. 5 years back when I first came out here. I was green as grass, didn't know what I was doing. The horse was half wild, and I thought I could break it myself. His hand came up unconsciously to touch the scar. Landed face first on a rock. Probably should have died, to be honest. Came close. There was no doctor. Nearest doctor was 3 days' ride away. My neighbor, old man named Wheeler, he stitched me up best he could. Did a hell of a job considering he usually worked on cattle. Silas smiled slightly, a self-deprecating twist of his mouth. It wasn't pretty before, but it's definitely not winning any beauty contests now. I think it makes you look distinguished, Eva said, then immediately felt her cheeks heat. What was she doing, making comments about his appearance? But Silas just laughed, a low, rusty sound, as if laughter was something he rarely used. That's a kind way of putting it. Most folks find it off-putting. Kids in town run away when they see me coming. Then the kids in town are idiots. The words came out sharper than Eva intended. You saved my life tonight, Mr. Boone. I don't care what your face looks like. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. It's Silas, he said quietly. You can call me Silas. Then you should call me Eva. Eva. He tried out the name like he was tasting it. That's a good name, strong. It was my grandmother's name. She was a seamstress in New York, came over from Ireland with nothing but a sewing needle and enough stubbornness to build a business. Eva smiled at the memory. My mother used to say I got her stubbornness. I think it was meant as a criticism, but I always took it as a compliment. Stubbornness keeps you alive out here, Silas said. Lord knows nothing else does. They talked as the fire burned down, carefully trading pieces of their stories like currency. Eva learned that Silas had been married once, back in Pennsylvania, that his wife Rebecca had died of fever 3 winters ago, that he'd come west because he couldn't stand to stay in the house they'd built together. She learned that he was 32 years old, that he preferred horses to cattle, but raised both because it made economic sense, that he played the harmonica but hadn't touched it in 2 years. In return, she told him about Thomas, about the mining accident that took him, about the in-laws who blamed her because she'd encouraged him to take the job, to try to make more money so they could afford a home of their own. She told him about the debts, about selling everything they owned and still coming up short, about her cousin's letter that seemed like the only option left. You really think your cousin will take you in? Silas asked. Eva hesitated. I hope so. The letter was from 3 years ago. She might not even be in Silver Creek anymore. But I didn't have anywhere else to go, so... She shrugged, trying to make it seem like less of a desperate gamble than it actually was. Silas nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. Well, we'll get you there. Stagecoach should be fixed in a day or two, and Silver Creek's only another day's ride past that. Thank you for everything. Eva set down her empty coffee cup. I should let you get some rest. It's late and you've been more than kind already. The blanket's all yours. Silas stood, stretching. There's more wood stacked by the door if the fire gets low. And Eva, he paused, meeting her eyes. You don't have to thank me. Out here, we help each other. That's just how it is. But Eva knew that wasn't entirely true. She'd seen enough of Willow Junction to know that not everyone subscribed to that philosophy, that plenty of people would have left her to freeze rather than extend a hand to a stranger. Silas Boone was different, and she was grateful beyond words. She settled onto the blanket by the fire after Silas retired to his bed in the corner. The warmth soaked into her bones, and exhaustion pulled at her like a tide. She could hear Silas's breathing across the room, slow and steady, and the sound was oddly comforting. For the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. As she drifted towards sleep, a thought occurred to her. What if the stagecoach took longer than expected to fix? What if she had to stay here for more than just a night or two? The thought should have worried her, should have sent her mind spiraling into anxiety about propriety and reputation and what people might think. But instead, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered outside, Eva felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt safe, and for now, that was enough. The next morning arrived cold and gray, with frost coating the windows and the smell of coffee strong in the air. Eva woke to find Silas already up, standing at the stove with his back to her, cooking something that made her stomach growl with hunger. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Hope you like eggs. The chickens are still laying despite the cold." I like anything I don't have to cook myself, Eva said, sitting up and folding the blankets. Her body ached from sleeping on the floor, but it was a manageable ache, nothing compared to the bone-deep exhaustion she'd felt yesterday. Silas handed her a plate piled with scrambled eggs and thick slices of fried bread. Not fancy, but it'll keep you going. They ate in companionable silence, and then Silas pushed back from the table. I need to check the cattle in the north pasture. Make sure they didn't get into any trouble overnight. There's more coffee in the pot if you want it. Make yourself at home.
Actually, Eva said, standing up. Could I help? With the chores, I mean. I'm not much good with cattle, but I can feed chickens, carry water, whatever needs doing. I don't want to just sit here while you do all the work. Silas looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. You don't owe me labor, Eva. I know, but I want to help. She met his eyes steadily. Please. He nodded slowly. All right, but you'll need warmer clothes. That coat won't do much good in the barn. He found her an old jacket of his that hung loose on her frame but cut the wind, and they worked together through the morning, feeding the chickens and collecting eggs, hauling water from the creek, mucking out stalls in the barn. Eva's hands were soft from months of idleness, and blisters formed quickly, but she didn't complain. There was something satisfying about physical work, about seeing the results of your efforts immediately. Around midday, Silas rode out to check on the cattle, leaving Eva alone at the cabin. She used the time to tidy up, sweeping the floor and washing the breakfast dishes, organizing the kitchen shelves in a way that made more sense. She found herself humming as she worked, a habit she'd lost after Thomas died, and the sound felt strange and familiar all at once. When Silas returned in the late afternoon, he stopped in the doorway, taking in the cleaned cabin with surprise. You didn't have to do all this, he said. I wanted to. Besides, I was bored. Eva wiped her hands on a cloth. I found some dried beef and potatoes in the cellar. I thought I could make stew for supper if that's all right. More than all right. Silas hung up his hat and coat. I'll get a fire going in the stove. They worked together to prepare the meal, and Eva found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. Silas was easy to be around. He didn't fill every silence with chatter, didn't ask probing questions or offer unwanted advice. He simply existed alongside her, solid and steady as the cabin itself. Over supper they talked more. Small things at first, observations about the weather and the land, but gradually deepening into real conversation. Eva found herself laughing at Silas's dry observations about his more difficult cattle, and he seemed to soften in her presence, the hard lines around his eyes easing. You're good company, he said suddenly as they were clearing the dishes. It's been nice having someone here. I've enjoyed it too, Eva said honestly, more than I expected to, if I'm being truthful. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that this unexpected situation had turned into something neither of them anticipated. Not just survival or charity, but genuine connection. That night, as Eva settled back onto her blanket by the fire, she found herself thinking about tomorrow. The stagecoach would be fixed soon. She'd go to Silver Creek, find her cousin Martha, start whatever new life waited for her there. The prospect should have excited her. Instead, it made her chest feel tight. She pushed the feeling away and closed her eyes, listening to the crackle of the fire and the wind outside, and tried not to think about how much she was dreading the moment she'd have to leave this cabin and the scarred stranger who'd shown her more kindness than anyone had in months. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now, she was right here, warm and safe, and that was enough. 3 days passed, and the stagecoach remained broken. Eva should have been anxious about the delay, should have been fretting over every lost hour, but instead she found herself settling into the rhythm of life at the cabin with an ease that surprised her. Each morning she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Silas moving quietly around the kitchen, trying not to wake her. Each morning she pretended to sleep a few minutes longer than necessary, listening to those domestic sounds that spoke of care and consideration. The work came naturally to both of them. Eva had grown up helping her mother with household tasks, and though Thomas's mining wages had been modest, she'd learned to stretch every penny, to make meals from almost nothing, to keep a home running on determination and ingenuity. Silas's cabin needed that kind of attention, not because he was careless,
but because a man living alone had different priorities than creating a real home. On the fourth morning, Eva was kneading bread dough at the kitchen counter when Silas came in from checking the horses. He stopped just inside the door, watching her work, and she felt his gaze like a physical thing. "What?" she asked, not looking up from the dough. "Nothing, it's just—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's been a long time since there was bread baking in this cabin. The smell! I'd forgotten what it was like." Eva understood what he wasn't saying. She'd seen the way he looked sometimes at the domestic touches she'd added, the wildflowers she'd picked and put in a tin cup on the table, the curtain she'd fashioned from an old sheet to give her sleeping area some privacy, the way she'd organized his chaotic pantry. He was remembering his wife, remembering what it felt like to share a home with someone. "Rebecca used to bake?" she asked gently. Silas nodded, moving to pour himself coffee. "Every Sunday," said it made the place feel like a real home instead of just a shelter. He sat down at the table, hands wrapped around his cup. "I tried to keep it up after she died, but I'm not much of a baker. Burned more loaves than I care to admit before I gave up." "I could teach you," Eva offered. "It's not as hard as people think. Just takes practice and patience." "Maybe," but his tone suggested he wasn't ready for that yet, wasn't ready to reclaim that particular piece of what he'd lost. They fell into silence, comfortable now with the quiet spaces between words. Eva shaped the dough into loaves and set them to rise near the warmth of the stove, then washed her hands and joined Silas at the table. "I should ride into town today," he said. "Check on the stagecoach, pick up a few things I forgot last time." Eva's stomach tightened. "Of course. I'll come with you if that's all right. I should see about the repairs myself." Something flickered across Silas's face. Reluctance, maybe, or concern. "Eva, I need to tell you something about that. About going into town with me." "What is it?" He set down his coffee cup, meeting her eyes directly. "People talk, you know that. And a woman staying out here with me, unchaperoned, they're going to have opinions about it. Ugly opinions." "I know." Eva had been trying not to think about it, but she wasn't naive. She knew exactly what conclusions people would draw, what names they'd call her. "But what choice do I have? I can't very well sleep in the street to preserve my reputation." "No, but I wanted you to understand what you're walking into. Mrs. Crowley will have spread it all over town by now, that you came to her looking for a room with no money, that you must have found some other arrangement, and when they see you with me—" He trailed off, his jaw tight. "They'll assume I'm paying for my shelter in the oldest way possible," Eva finished bluntly. "I understand, Silas. Believe me, I understand how people think. It doesn't bother you?" Eva considered the question carefully. A month ago, even a week ago, the answer would have been yes. She'd always cared deeply about propriety, about what people thought, about maintaining the appearance of respectability. But something had shifted in the past few days. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the simple realization that reputation couldn't keep you warm at night, couldn't fill your stomach, couldn't offer comfort when you were drowning in loneliness. "I'd rather be alive and gossiped about than dead and respectable," she said finally. "Let them think what they want. I know the truth, you know the truth. That's enough." Silas studied her for a long moment, and she saw respect in his eyes, maybe even admiration. "You're tougher than you look, Eva Merritt." "I've had to be." They rode into town in the early afternoon, the wagon rattling over the rutted road, the prairie stretching endless and brown on all sides. Eva wore her best dress, the dark blue wool that she'd saved for church back in Missouri, and had pinned up her hair with extra care. If people were going to judge her, she'd at least give them nothing to criticize in her appearance. Willow Junction looked exactly the same as it had 4 days ago, but Eva felt different. She wasn't the desperate, frightened woman who'd been abandoned by the stagecoach. She'd found her footing, at least temporarily, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel ashamed for surviving. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop outside the blacksmith shop, where the stagecoach sat with its wheels removed, looking sad and broken in the afternoon sun. "Wait here," Silas said quietly. "I'll find out what the situation is." But Eva climbed down from the wagon seat before he could stop her. "We'll both find out." The blacksmith was a thick-armed man named Garrett, with a permanently soot-stained face and suspicious eyes. He looked from Silas to Eva and back again, and his expression said everything about what he was thinking. "Boone," he said by way of greeting, "and the lady from the stage. When will the repairs be finished?" Eva asked directly, refusing to be intimidated by his stare. "Another week, maybe more. Axel's worse than we thought. Had to send to Denver for parts." Eva's heart sank. Another week. 7 more days of living in Silas's cabin, 7 more days of accumulating gossip and judgment. "A week," she repeated. "You're certain?" "Unless you want to ride out in a coach with a cracked axle, yes, ma'am, I'm certain." Garrett crossed his arms. "Of course, if you found other accommodations, maybe you're not in such a hurry anymore." The implication was clear, and Eva felt her cheeks heat with anger rather than shame. Before she could respond, Silas stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Mind your tongue, Garrett. The lady's travel plans are none of your concern." "Just making an observation," Garrett said, but he took a step back. For all his bulk, he clearly wasn't interested in testing Silas's temper. "Observe silently," Silas said. "We'll check back in a week." He placed a hand on Eva's lower back, guiding her away from the blacksmith shop. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the barely controlled anger. "I'm sorry," he said quietly once they were out of earshot. "I should have known he'd be like that." "It's not your fault." Eva kept her head high, aware of the eyes watching them from windows and doorways. "And he's not wrong, is he? I have found other accommodations. I'm just not paying for them the way he thinks." "The way he thinks doesn't matter." "Maybe not. But it will make things difficult for you. People will talk about you too, you know. They'll say you're taking advantage of a desperate woman, or that you're foolish, or—" "Let them talk." Silas's voice was firm. "I've survived worse than gossip." They made their way to the general store, and Eva was acutely aware of how the conversation stopped when they entered, how heads turned and eyes followed their every move. Mrs. Patterson, the store owner's wife, stood behind the counter with her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Mr. Boone," she said coldly, "what can I get for you?" Silas handed her a list. "These items, please, and whatever Mrs. Merritt needs." Eva hadn't planned to buy anything. She still only had her 17 cents, but she found herself asking for thread and needles, a small indulgence, but necessary if she was going to mend Silas's shirts properly. The ones she'd seen hanging in his cabin were all frayed at the cuffs and collars, missing buttons, coming apart at the seams. "That'll be 30 cents, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice suggesting the price was higher than usual. Eva opened her small purse, carefully counting out her precious coins, but Silas's hand came down over hers, stopping her. "Add it to my order," he told Mrs. Patterson. "No," Eva said quickly. "I can pay for this myself." "Save your money." Silas's tone left no room for argument. "You'll need it when you get to Silver Creek." Eva wanted to protest, wanted to insist on her independence, but she also knew he was right. 17 cents wouldn't go far, and she had no idea what she'd find when she finally reached her cousin. She nodded reluctantly, letting him pay, and tried not to see it as another debt she was accumulating. As Mrs. Patterson wrapped their purchases, 2 women entered the store, one older, dressed in expensive fabrics with her gray hair perfectly coiffed, and a younger woman who looked to be about Eva's age, pretty in a sharp-featured way. They stopped short when they saw Eva and Silas.
"Well," the older woman said, her voice carrying clearly through the small store. "Silas Boone. I heard you'd taken in a stray, but I had to see it to believe it." Silas's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Thorne. Emily." "Mother, perhaps we should—" the younger woman started, but Mrs. Thorne cut her off. "I'm simply curious about your guest." Mrs. Thorne's eyes raked over Eva with undisguised contempt. It must be such a comfort, having female company after all this time alone, though I do wonder what dear Rebecca would think of the arrangement. The words were meant to wound, and they did. Eva saw Silas flinch, saw pain flash across his face at the mention of his dead wife. Something fierce and protective rose up in her chest. "Mrs. Thorne, is it?" Eva stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "How kind of you to be concerned about Mr. Boone's welfare. I'm sure it must be difficult for you having nothing better to do than speculate about other people's private affairs. Perhaps you should find a hobby. Needlework, perhaps, or charitable work. Though charity does require a generous heart, so maybe needlework would be more suitable. Mrs. Patterson made a choking sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Mrs. Thorne's face turned an interesting shade of purple. "How dare you! Mother, we should go," Emily said quickly, tugging on her mother's arm. "We have that appointment with the dressmaker, remember?" Mrs. Thorne allowed herself to be led away, but not before shooting Eva a look of pure venom. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "Both of you." The door slammed behind them, and silence fell over the store. Eva realized her hands were shaking. She'd never spoken to anyone like that in her life. Had always been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the woman who smoothed over conflicts rather than creating them.
"Lord have mercy," Mrs. Patterson said finally, and there was something almost like approval in her voice. "Nobody's ever shut up Delilah Thorne that fast. Thought she was going to have an apoplexy right here in my store." Silas was looking at Eva with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Eva's voice was fierce. "She had no right to speak to you that way, to throw your wife's memory in your face like a weapon. No right at all. She's the mayor's wife," Mrs. Patterson said, though not unkindly. "Has a lot of influence in this town. You've made an enemy there, Mrs. Merritt." "Then it's Mrs. Merritt now, is it?" Eva met the older woman's eyes. "I noticed you were calling me that woman when I was desperate and alone. Funny how having a protector changes things." Mrs. Patterson had the grace to look embarrassed. She finished wrapping their purchases in silence and handed them over without another word. Outside, Silas loaded the supplies into the wagon, his movements tight and controlled. Eva climbed up onto the seat, and they started the journey back to the cabin without speaking. The silence felt different now, not comfortable, but charged with something Eva couldn't quite name. They were halfway home when Silas finally spoke. "You shouldn't have done that, defended me like that." "Why not?" "Because now they'll go after you twice as hard. Mrs. Thorne doesn't forgive insults, and she has the whole town in her pocket." He kept his eyes on the road. "You're only going to be here another week. After that, you'll go to Silver Creek and never have to see these people again. But you've made things harder for yourself for no good reason." "It wasn't for no reason." Eva twisted her hands in her lap. "She was cruel to you, Silas. She used your wife's memory to hurt you, and I couldn't just stand there and let it happen." "Why not? Everyone else does." "Because you're not everyone else to me." The words came out before Eva could stop them, raw and honest. "You saved me. You showed me kindness when no one else would. You gave me shelter and food, and you made me feel human again when I was starting to forget what that felt like. So no, I couldn't just stand there and let that horrible woman hurt you." Silas pulled the wagon to a stop, right there in the middle of the empty road, with nothing around them but grass and sky. He turned to look at Eva, really look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You're the damnedest woman I've ever met," he said softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is one." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair that had come loose behind her ear. His fingers were rough and calloused, but his touch was gentle. "Thank you, Eva, for defending me, for seeing me as something other than the scarred hermit everyone else sees." "I see a good man," Eva said quietly. "That's all I've ever seen." Something passed between them in that moment, something profound and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Eva felt it settle in her chest like a living thing, warm and insistent, and she knew with sudden certainty that she was in trouble. The kind of trouble that had nothing to do with broken stagecoaches and small-town gossip, and everything to do with the way her heart beat faster when Silas was near. She was developing feelings for him, real feelings, the kind that didn't go away just because they were inconvenient. Silas seemed to sense it too. He pulled his hand back slowly, his expression conflicted. "We should get home," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Weather's turning." He was right. Dark clouds were gathering on the western horizon, and the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was different now. Charged. Full of things neither of them was ready to say out loud. That evening, as storm clouds gathered and the first drops of rain began to fall, Eva found herself standing at the cabin window, watching Silas secure the barn doors against the coming weather. He moved with efficient grace, despite his size, and she caught herself memorizing the way he moved, the line of his shoulders, the determined set of his jaw. This was dangerous. This was foolish. She was a widow with no prospects, heading to an uncertain future in Silver Creek. He was a man still grieving his wife, living alone by choice, building walls around his heart that she had no business trying to breach. But her heart, it seemed, hadn't gotten the message about what was sensible and what wasn't. Silas came in as the rain began in earnest, water dripping from his hat and coat. Eva handed him a towel without speaking, and their fingers brushed in the exchange. Such a small touch, barely anything at all, but Eva felt it like lightning. "Thank you," Silas said, drying his face. "It's going to be a rough night. Storm looks like a bad one." He was right. Within an hour, the rain was hammering the roof like artillery, and thunder shook the walls. Eva had never been afraid of storms, but there was something primal about this one, something that spoke of the raw power of the plains unleashed. They made dinner together, salt pork and beans, simple but filling, and ate by lamplight as the storm raged outside. Every time the thunder crashed, Eva noticed Silas tense slightly, his hand tightening on his fork. She wondered if he was remembering other storms, other nights alone in this cabin, missing his wife. "Tell me about her," Eva said impulsively. "About Rebecca. If you want to, I mean. If it's not too painful." Silas was quiet for so long that Eva thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he set down his fork and stared at the flickering lamp flame. "She was small," he said finally. "Barely came up to my shoulder. Had red hair that she hated but I thought was beautiful. She laughed a lot, had this laugh that sounded like music, like everything in the world was funny if you just looked at it right." He smiled, a sad, distant expression. "She was the one who wanted to come west. I would have stayed in Pennsylvania, but she had this dream of open spaces, of building something from nothing, so we came." "And you built this," Eva said, gesturing to the cabin. "We did. Every log, every nail. It took us 2 years, living in a tent while we worked. She never complained, not once, even when her hands were bleeding and her back ached. She just kept working, kept believing it would be worth it." His voice cracked slightly. "And then, just when we'd finally finished, just when we could start really living instead of just surviving, she got sick. Fever came out of nowhere. 3 days later, she was gone." "I'm so sorry, Silas." The worst part was how senseless it felt. We'd survived everything. The journey west, the harsh winters, near starvation that first year. We'd built this place with our bare hands, and then a simple fever took her, and there was nothing I could do. Couldn't fix it, couldn't fight it, couldn't save her. He looked at Eva, and she saw the guilt in his eyes. "I'm a man who solves problems, but I couldn't solve that one." Eva reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "It wasn't your fault. Fever is cruel and random. You can't blame yourself for not being able to stop it. Can't I? I brought her out here. If we'd stayed in Pennsylvania, maybe there would have been better doctors, better medicine, or maybe she would have died anyway." Eva squeezed his hand. "You can't know, Silas. You can't torture yourself with maybes and what-ifs. I did that for months after Thomas died, wondering if I'd encouraged him to take that mining job, if I'd somehow caused his death by wanting more for us. But it doesn't change anything. They're gone, and we're still here, and the only thing we can do is keep living." "Is that what you're doing?" Silas turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. Living, or just surviving? It was a good question. Eva wasn't sure she knew the answer. "I'm trying," she said honestly. "Some days are easier than others." "Same here." They sat like that as the storm continued, hands linked across the table, finding comfort in shared grief and understanding. Outside, lightning split the sky and thunder rolled across the plains like the voice of God. But inside the cabin, there was only warmth and lamplight, and 2 people who'd been broken by loss learning how to be whole again. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Eva woke early to help with morning chores, fed the chickens while Silas tended the horses, hauled water from the creek that ran behind the property. Her hands grew tougher, the blisters hardening into calluses.
Her body grew stronger from the physical work. She felt herself changing in ways that had nothing to do with physical labor. She was becoming someone different out here on the plains, someone braver, someone who spoke her mind and stood her ground and didn't apologize for taking up space in the world. In the afternoons, while Silas worked in the fields or mended fences, Eva tackled the domestic tasks. She washed clothes in the creek, hanging them to dry on a line Silas had strung between two cottonwood trees. She mended his worn shirts, replacing buttons and patching tears. She baked bread and made simple meals from the supplies in the pantry, stretching ingredients in ways that reminded her of her mother's careful economy. And in the evenings, they talked. They talked about everything and nothing, about books they'd read and places they'd been, and dreams they'd had before life taught them that dreams were dangerous things. Silas told her about Pennsylvania, about working in his father's lumber mill, about the forest that had seemed so vast when he was a child. Eva told him about Missouri, about her grandmother's sewing shop, about the way the Mississippi looked at sunset. They talked about Thomas and Rebecca, slowly, carefully, learning not to flinch at the mention of the dead. They talked about grief and guilt, and the particular loneliness of being widowed young. They talked about the future, though both of them seemed reluctant to look too far ahead. On the 6th day, Eva was kneading bread dough when Silas came in carrying something in his arms, a bundle of worn fabric that he set carefully on the table. "I found these in the chest," he said quietly. "Some of Rebecca's dresses. I thought, maybe you could use them. Make them over to fit you. You only have the one good dress, and—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Eva wiped her hands and moved to the table, carefully unfolding the bundle. There were 3 dresses, simple calico and cotton, well made but worn. She could see the love in every stitch, could imagine Rebecca wearing them, moving through this cabin, laughing her musical laugh. "Silas, I can't take these. They were hers." "They were hers," he agreed, "but she's gone, and they're just sitting in a chest doing nobody any good. Rebecca would have wanted someone to use them. She was practical that way." He met Eva's eyes. "Please. It would make me feel better, knowing they were being worn instead of just sitting there, waiting for someone who's never coming back." Eva understood what he was really saying. This was part of letting go, of acknowledging that Rebecca was gone and life had to continue without her. It was a gift, and refusing it would be cruel. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll take good care of them." That afternoon, while Silas was out checking on the cattle, Eva tried on the dresses. Rebecca had been smaller than her, as Silas had said, but Eva was handy with a needle. She could let out seams, add panels of fabric, make them work. As she stood in front of the small mirror Silas used for shaving, wearing one of Rebecca's dresses, Eva felt strange. Not like she was trying to replace the dead woman, but like she was being welcomed into a space that had been closed off. Like she was being given permission to belong here. The thought should have scared her. She was leaving soon, after all. The stagecoach would be fixed, and she'd go to Silver Creek, and this interlude would become nothing but a memory. But standing there in Rebecca's dress, in Silas's cabin, with the smell of baking bread filling the air, Eva felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like she was home. That realization terrified her more than anything else. That evening, Silas came in to find her still wearing Rebecca's blue calico dress, altered to fit her taller frame. He stopped in the doorway, and Eva watched emotions play across his face. Grief, yes, but also something warmer, something that looked almost like hope. "It suits you," he said finally. "You're sure it doesn't bother you, seeing me in her clothes?" Silas crossed the room slowly, stopping in front of her. "It did at first," he admitted. "When I first saw you standing there, for just a second I thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "But then I realized something. You're not Rebecca. You're Eva. And seeing you in that dress, looking so at home here, it doesn't hurt. It feels right." "Silas, I know you're leaving soon," he continued, his voice rough. "I know you have to go to Silver Creek, find your cousin, start your new life. But I need you to know something, Eva. These past 6 days, having you here, it's been the first time since Rebecca died that I haven't felt completely alone. The first time this cabin has felt like a home, instead of just a place I sleep." Eva's heart was hammering in her chest. "I feel it too. Being here with you, it's—" She struggled to find the words.
It's the first time since Thomas died that I've felt like myself again, like I'm a person and not just someone's widow, someone's burden. They stood there, inches apart, the air between them charged with all the things they weren't quite ready to say. Silas raised his hand slowly, cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. "One more week," he said quietly. "Then you have to go. But Eva—" Whatever he was about to say was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. They sprang apart like guilty children, and Silas crossed to the door, opening it to reveal Sheriff Dugan standing on the porch, his expression grim. Behind him, Eva could see 2 horses tied to the rail, and her heart sank. "Sheriff," Silas said carefully, "what can I do for you?" "Need to speak with you, Boone. And the lady." Dugan's eyes found Eva standing by the fireplace. "If you don't mind." "What's this about?" "Maybe we should talk inside, out of the weather." Silas reluctantly stepped back, allowing the sheriff to enter. Dugan removed his hat, nodding politely to Eva, but his eyes were hard. "Mrs. Merritt, I presume?" "Yes." Eva lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" "That depends. I've had some concerns raised about your living situation here." "By Mrs. Thorne, I imagine," Eva said dryly. Dugan had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Mrs. Thorne is a respected member of this community, and when she expresses concerns about moral conduct—" "Moral conduct?" Silas's voice was dangerous. "You've got to be joking." "I'm not joking, Boone. You know how this looks. An unmarried woman staying alone with a man—" "She had nowhere else to go," Silas interrupted. "The boarding house turned her away, she had no money, and a storm was coming. Was I supposed to let her freeze? Of course not. But now it's been almost a week, and people are talking. Mrs. Thorne has suggested that if Mrs. Merritt needs charitable housing, the church could arrange something. Proper supervision, separate quarters." "Tell Mrs. Thorne to mind her own damn business," Eva said sharply. Both men turned to look at her in surprise. "I'm a grown woman, Sheriff. I can choose where I stay and with whom, and I choose to stay here with Mr. Boone, who has been nothing but respectful and kind. If Mrs. Thorne has a problem with that, she can come say it to my face instead of hiding behind the law." Sheriff Dugan sighed. "Mrs. Merritt, I understand your position, but you have to understand mine. Mrs. Thorne and her husband have a lot of influence in this town. If they decide to make trouble, then let them make trouble," Silas said flatly. "Eva stays here until the stagecoach is fixed. That's the end of it." The sheriff looked between them, reading the situation with lawman's eyes, and something shifted in his expression. "I see," he said quietly. "Well then, I've done my duty, delivered the message. What you do with it is your business." He put his hat back on and moved toward the door, then paused. "But Boone, watch yourself. The Thorns don't like being defied. They'll find a way to make this difficult." "They can try," Silas said. After the sheriff left, Eva sank down into the chair by the fire, her legs suddenly weak. "I should go," she said. "I should take them up on the church's offer, find somewhere else to stay. I don't want to cause trouble for you." "No." Silas's voice was firm. "You're not going anywhere. Let them talk. Let them threaten. I don't care." "But they could." "What? Run me out of town?" Silas laughed bitterly. "I own my land free and clear. I don't owe anybody anything. They can disapprove all they want, but they can't touch me. They can make your life miserable." "My life has been miserable for 3 years, Eva." Silas knelt down beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "These past 6 days with you here, this is the first time I felt anything besides grief and loneliness. So no, I don't care what Mrs. Thorne thinks or what the town thinks. You stay as long as you need to." Eva looked at their joined hands, at his scarred face so earnest and determined, and felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. She was falling for this man, had maybe already fallen, and it was the worst possible timing, the most impractical thing she could do. But her heart had never been particularly practical. "One more week," she whispered. "Then the stagecoach will be fixed, and I'll go to Silver Creek." "One more week," Silas agreed, but neither of them sounded convinced that a week would be enough. Neither of them acknowledged that a week might be too much. The rain continued through the night, steady and relentless, drumming on the roof like 1,000 fingers.
Eva lay awake on her blanket by the fire, listening to the storm and to Silas's breathing from across the room, and wondering how she was going to find the strength to leave when the time came. Because somewhere between being rescued from a desperate situation and learning to make bread in this cabin, somewhere between mending Silas's shirts and talking about grief and loss, somewhere between being strangers and being something more, Eva had done the impossible. She'd found home in the last place she expected, and in 6 days she was going to have to walk away from it. The morning of the 7th day dawned clear and cold, the storm having washed the world clean and left everything sparkling with frost. Eva woke to find Silas already gone, out tending to the animals that had been cooped up during yesterday's rain. She dressed quickly in one of Rebecca's altered dresses, the green one that brought out the color of her eyes, and set about making breakfast. She was frying eggs when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Too fast. The kind of speed that spoke of urgency or anger or both. Eva's hands stilled on the spatula, and she moved to the window just as Silas emerged from the barn, his body going tense at the sight of the approaching rider. The man who dismounted was tall and well-dressed, with dark hair graying at the temples and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't twisted with such obvious fury. He strode toward Silas with the kind of purposeful anger that made Eva's stomach clench with fear. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the confrontation escalating. The stranger jabbing his finger at Silas's chest, Silas standing his ground, but clearly trying to de-escalate. Then the stranger's head turned toward the cabin, toward the window where Eva stood, and recognition hit her like a physical blow. Marcus Hale, Thomas's older brother. Eva's blood turned to ice. What was he doing here? How had he even found her? She watched as Marcus said something else to Silas, something that made Silas's hands curl into fists at his sides. Then Marcus started walking toward the cabin, and Eva knew she had no choice but to face him. She met him at the door, stepping out onto the porch before he could enter. Behind him, Silas was following, his face dark with barely controlled anger. "Marcus," Eva said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Marcus's voice was sharp with disbelief. "What am I doing here? Eva, I've been searching for you for weeks. Your landlady in Kansas City said you'd headed west, but the trail went cold. I had to hire a detective to track you down, and when I finally find you, it's living in sin with some—" He looked past her at Silas with undisguised contempt. "Some scarred hermit in the middle of nowhere." "I am not living in sin," Eva said coldly. "Mr. Boone offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to go, that's all." "That's all?" Marcus laughed, the sound bitter and cruel. "You expect me to believe that? A widow, alone with a man, staying in his cabin? I know what that means, Eva. Everyone knows what that means." "Then everyone is wrong," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous as he came to stand beside Eva. "And you need to watch your tongue, Hale, before you say something you'll regret." Marcus turned his attention to Silas, looking him up and down with obvious disdain. "And you need to understand something, Boone.
Eva is family. She's my brother's widow, which makes her my responsibility, and I'm not leaving her here to ruin what's left of her reputation." "I'm not your responsibility?" Eva said sharply. "I stopped being your responsibility the day your mother threw me out of her house and told me I wasn't welcome at Thomas's funeral." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Shame, maybe, or the ghost of guilt. "That was—" Mother was grieving. She said things she didn't mean. She meant every word, and you know it. You all blame me for Thomas's death. You said I'd pushed him into taking that mining job, that if I'd been content with what we had, he'd still be alive. Eva felt old pain rising in her throat, threatening to choke her. "You made it very clear that I wasn't part of your family anymore. So don't stand there now and tell me you're here out of concern for my welfare." "I'm here," Marcus said, his voice softening slightly, "because despite everything, you were my brother's wife. He loved you, Eva, and I think he'd want me to make sure you were all right." "She's fine," Silas said flatly. "Now you can leave." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "I'm not leaving without her. Eva, I have money. I can set you up in a boarding house, help you find work, make sure you're taken care of properly. You don't have to do this." He gestured vaguely at the cabin, at Silas, at the whole situation with disgust clear in every line of his body. "I don't want your help," Eva said. I'm going to Silver Creek to stay with my cousin Martha. I have a plan, Marcus. I don't need you to rescue me." "Silver Creek?" Marcus frowned. "Eva, I have some bad news about that. Your cousin Martha, she's not there anymore. She moved to San Francisco 2 years ago, married some banker, and left no forwarding address. I tried to track her down myself. Thought you might have gone there. There's nothing for you in Silver Creek." The words hit Eva like a punch to the stomach. Martha was gone. The one person she'd been counting on, the one shred of hope she'd been clinging to, didn't exist anymore. All her plans, all her careful preparations, all of it had been for nothing. She must have swayed slightly because Silas's hand came to her elbow, steadying her. "Eva?" "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'm fine." "You're clearly not fine," Marcus said, and there was something almost like genuine concern in his voice now. "Eva, come with me. Let me help you. I know things ended badly between our families, but Thomas would want me to take care of you, please." Eva looked at Marcus, at his expensive clothes and his well-fed face, and his assumption that money and family obligation could fix everything. Then she looked at Silas, at his scarred face and rough hands, and the concern in his eyes that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with actual caring. "No," she said firmly. "Thank you for the offer, Marcus, but no. I'll figure something out. I always do." "Figure something out?" Marcus's concern was rapidly turning back to anger. "Eva, be reasonable. You have no money, no prospects, no family to speak of. What exactly are you going to figure out? How long you can stay here playing house with Boone before the whole territory knows you for what you are?" "That's enough," Silas said, his voice hard as iron. "You need to leave, now." "I'm not leaving without her," Marcus set his jaw stubbornly. "Eva, I'm asking you one more time. Come with me. Let me help you do this the right way. And I'm telling you one more time, no." Eva stepped closer to Silas, and she felt his solid presence at her back like a shield. "Mr. Boone has shown me more kindness and respect in a week than your family showed me in 2 years of marriage. So if you think I'm going to trade his company for yours, you're sadly mistaken." Marcus's face flushed red with anger. "Fine. Stay here then. Ruin yourself completely. But don't come crying to me when he gets tired of you and throws you out. Men like him..." He looked at Silas with pure contempt. "Men like him don't keep women around out of the goodness of their hearts. He's getting something out of this arrangement, Eva. And when he's had his fill, you'll find yourself right back where you started, only this time with a reputation so tattered that no decent man will ever..." He didn't get to finish the sentence. Silas moved so fast that Eva barely saw it. One moment he was standing beside her. The next, his fist connected with Marcus's jaw with a sickening crack. Marcus went down hard, landing on his back in the dirt, blood streaming from his split lip. "I told you to watch your tongue," Silas said, standing over him. His voice was steady, but Eva could see his hands shaking with rage. "And I told you to leave. Now get on your horse and ride out of here before I forget that I'm trying to be civilized." Marcus struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. "You'll regret this, Boone. Both of you will. I have friends in this territory, people with influence. When I'm done, you won't be able to show your face in any decent town between here and California." "Then it's a good thing I don't care about decent towns," Silas said. "Now get." For a moment, Eva thought Marcus might actually attack Silas. She could see him weighing his chances, calculating whether his pride was worth another beating. But then he seemed to think better of it. He spat blood in the dirt, shot Eva one last look that mixed pity and disgust, and stalked back to his horse. "This isn't over," he called back as he mounted. "You're making a mistake, Eva. A mistake you'll pay for." He rode off at a gallop, and Eva stood frozen on the porch, watching him disappear into the distance. Her mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had just happened. Martha was gone. Silver Creek was a dead end. Marcus had threatened them both. And Silas... She turned to look at him, and her heart clenched at the sight. He was standing with his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension, his right hand cradled against his chest. His knuckles were split and bleeding. "Silas, your hand..." "I'm fine." But his voice was tight with pain. "You're not fine. Come inside. Let me look at it." He followed her into the cabin, and Eva guided him to sit at the table while she fetched water and clean cloths. His hand was a mess, knuckles split open, already starting to swell. It would hurt like hell for days. "You didn't have to hit him," Eva said quietly as she cleaned the wounds. "I could have handled it." "He called you—" Silas stopped, jaw clenched. "He said things that no man should say about any woman, let alone you. I wasn't going to stand there and let him talk like that. And now he's going to make trouble for both of us. He meant what he said, Silas. He knows people. He can make our lives very difficult." "Let him try." Silas met her eyes, and there was something fierce and protective in his gaze that made Eva's breath catch. "I meant what I said that first night, Eva. You're under my roof, under my protection. That means something to me. It means everything to me." Eva's hand stilled on his injured knuckles. "Why? Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" "You really don't know?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Silas reached up with his good hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin the way he'd done days ago, before the sheriff's visit interrupted them. "Because in the week since you walked into my life, you've reminded me what it feels like to be alive instead of just existing. Because you see me, really see me, and you're not afraid or disgusted by what you find. Because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is whether you'll smile at something I say. And because—" He stopped, took a breath. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Eva. And I know that's crazy and impossible and terrible timing, but it's true." Eva's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Silas, You don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know you're planning to leave, to figure out what to do now that Silver Creek isn't an option. I know you have a whole life to build that doesn't include a scarred rancher in the middle of nowhere, but I needed you to know how I feel. I needed you to know that if you wanted to stay, if you wanted to build that life here instead, I'd count myself the luckiest man alive." Tears were burning in Eva's eyes, blurring her vision. "You're asking me to stay? To live here with you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it. I know it's not proper, and I know what people would say, but Eva—" His voice cracked slightly. "I don't want to lose you. And if that makes me selfish, so be it." Eva looked at this man who'd saved her, who'd given her shelter and kindness and protection, who'd defended her honor with his fists, even knowing it would bring trouble. She looked at the cabin that had become more of a home in a week than anywhere she'd lived in years. She looked at her future, uncertain, frightening, but full of possibility if she was brave enough to reach for it. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, I love you too." Silas's eyes widened with hope and disbelief. "Eva, but I can't stay here. Not like this. Not unmarried, living in sin, giving Mrs. Thorne and Marcus Hale and everyone else exactly what they want to think about us." She took his hands in hers, careful of his injured knuckles. "If I stay, Silas, if we do this, we do it right. We do it in a way that no one can question." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You mean, I mean that if you want me to stay, you need to marry me, properly, in front of God and the whole damn town, so that when Marcus comes back with his threats and his influence, when Mrs. Thorne tries to ruin us, we can look them in the eye and tell them we did nothing wrong." A smile was spreading across Silas's face, slow and wondering. "Eva Merritt, are you asking me to marry you? I'm telling you the conditions for staying. If you can't meet them, then I'll figure out another plan, and—" He kissed her, just leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, cutting off her words with the simple, devastating gesture. It was Eva's first kiss since Thomas died, and it felt nothing like kissing Thomas had felt. This was different, desperate and tender and full of promise all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Silas was grinning. "Is that a yes?" Eva asked. "That's a hell yes," Silas said. "We'll do it tomorrow, today, if we can find someone to marry us." "Tomorrow's Sunday," Eva said practically, her mind already racing ahead. "There'll be a church service. We can ask the reverend after. Make it proper and public so no one can say we're hiding anything." "You sure about this?" Silas's expression turned serious. "Marriage is forever, Eva, and I know we've only known each other a week. If you need more time, I've had enough time to know that I don't want to leave here, that I don't want to leave you." Eva squeezed his hands. I know it's fast. I know people will talk. But Silas, I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of doing what's proper and expected and safe. For once in my life, I want to choose something just because it makes me happy. And marrying me makes you happy? Terrifyingly so. They spent the rest of the day preparing, though there wasn't much to prepare beyond getting their best clothes ready and making sure they were both presentable. Silas disappeared into the barn for a while and came back with a small wooden box that he set carefully on the table. Rebecca's wedding ring, he said quietly. I know it's not ideal wearing another woman's ring, but it's perfect, Eva said, looking at the simple gold band. She'd want it to be used, wouldn't she? To mean something again instead of just sitting in a box? I think so. I hope so. Silas closed the box and set it aside. Tomorrow, then. We'll ride into town for the church service and talk to Reverend Mills after. And deal with whatever reaction we get, Eva added. Together, Silas said firmly. We deal with it together. That night, Eva lay awake by the fire, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the magnitude of what she was about to do. In less than 24 hours, she'd be married again. To a man she'd known for exactly 7 days. A man who was still grieving his first wife, who lived miles from anywhere, who had a scarred face and a reputation for being strange and difficult. She should be terrified, should be questioning her sanity, wondering if desperation had driven her to make a decision she'd regret for the rest of her life. But she wasn't terrified. She was certain. Morning came too quickly and too slowly, all at once. Eva dressed in her best dress, the dark blue wool she'd worn on her first trip to town, and pinned up her hair with trembling fingers. Silas wore his Sunday suit, mended now by Eva's careful stitching, and combed his hair back from his face. They looked like what they were, two people about to make the most important decision of their lives. The ride into Willow Junction felt longer than usual, though in reality it was the same 8 miles it had always been. They didn't talk much. There didn't seem to be words big enough for what they were feeling. The church was already filling up when they arrived, families in their Sunday best filing through the white-painted doors. Eva saw heads turn as she and Silas walked up the front steps, saw whispers starting to spread like wildfire through the crowd. Mrs. Thorne was there with her daughter Emily, and the look she gave Eva could have curdled milk. They found seats near the back, and Eva tried to focus on Reverend Mills's sermon, but the words washed over her without meaning. She was too aware of Silas beside her, of his hand occasionally brushing hers, of the weight of what they were about to do. When the service finally ended, people filed out slowly, and Eva felt the stares like physical touches. She and Silas waited until most of the congregation had left, then approached Reverend Mills at the front of the church. The Reverend was an older man with kind eyes and thinning hair, and he smiled when he saw them approaching. Mr. Boone, Mrs. Merritt, what can I do for you? We'd like to be married, Silas said directly. Today, if possible. Right now, if you're willing. Reverend Mills' eyebrows rose in surprise. That's quite sudden. Have you been courting long? Long enough to know it's right, Eva said. Please, Reverend, we don't need anything elaborate, just the ceremony, properly witnessed. That's all we ask. The Reverend studied them both for a long moment, and Eva held her breath, waiting for questions or objections or a refusal. But then he smiled. I've been a minister for 30 years, he said quietly, and in that time, I've learned to recognize genuine feeling when I see it. You two, there's something real here, something worth blessing. He nodded toward the front of the church. Give me a few minutes to prepare, and we'll need witnesses. Let me see who's still around. He disappeared into the back room, and Eva let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. He's going to do it, she whispered. We're actually going to do this. Having second thoughts? Silas asked, and there was vulnerability in the question that made Eva's heart ache. Not even a little bit, she said firmly. Reverend Mills returned with 2 witnesses, Mrs. Patterson from the general store and her husband Harold, who looked confused but willing. They took their places at the front of the church, and Eva realized with a start that this was really happening. In a few minutes, she'd be married again. To Silas Boone. A week ago, she hadn't even known he existed, and now, dearly beloved, Reverend Mills began, and Eva forced herself to focus, to be present for this moment instead of lost in her swirling thoughts.
The ceremony was simple and quick. There was no music, no flowers, no gathered crowd of well-wishers, just two people making promises in a half-empty church, with only God and a handful of witnesses to hear them. When Silas slipped Rebecca's ring onto Eva's finger, his hands were shaking. When Eva said, "I do," her voice was steady and sure. When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, and Silas kissed her there in front of the altar, Eva felt something click into place, like a piece of her soul that had been missing had finally found its way home. "Congratulations," Reverend Mills said warmly, shaking their hands. "May God bless your union and grant you many happy years together." "Thank you," Eva said, and meant it with her whole heart. "Thank you for believing in us." They signed the marriage register with the Pattersons as witnesses, and then they were walking out of the church as husband and wife. The afternoon sun was bright, almost blinding, and Eva squinted against it, her hand firmly clasped in Silas's. They made it exactly 3 steps before Mrs. Thorne's voice rang out across the churchyard. "Well, well, if it isn't the happy couple." Eva turned to see Mrs. Thorne standing with the group of other town matrons, all of them staring with varying degrees of shock and disapproval. Behind them, Eva could see Sheriff Dugan and several other men, including, her heart sank, Marcus Hale. Of course Marcus was still in town. Of course he'd seen them enter the church, and of course he'd stayed to see what would happen. "Mrs. Thorne," Silas said evenly, "if you'll excuse us, my wife and I were just leaving." "Your wife?" Mrs. Thorne's laugh was sharp and mocking. "My dear Mr. Boone, surely you don't expect anyone to believe this farce. You two have been living in sin for over a week, and now you rush to the altar in some pathetic attempt to legitimize what's already been done? It's shameful." "What's shameful," Eva said, her voice carrying clear across the churchyard, "is the way you've been spreading lies about us. What's shameful is the way you've been trying to ruin a good man's reputation just because he showed kindness to a stranger. What's shameful, Mrs. Thorne, is you." A shocked silence fell over the crowd. Nobody spoke to Delilah Thorne like that. Nobody. Mrs. Thorne's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "How dare you? She's under my roof, my protection, and now my name," Silas said, his voice calm but unyielding. "She's my wife, properly married in the sight of God and witnessed by good people. And if you've got a problem with that, Mrs. Thorne, you can take it up with Reverend Mills. Or better yet, you can take it up with God when you get to wherever judgmental busybodies go when they die." Several people in the crowd made shocked sounds, but Eva also heard a few stifled laughs. Mrs. Patterson was openly grinning. "This is an outrage," Mrs. Thorne sputtered. "Mayor, are you going to let them speak to me this way?" A portly man stepped forward, Mayor Thorne himself, looking uncomfortable and tired. "Delilah, perhaps we should—" "No." Marcus Hale stepped forward and Eva's stomach clenched. "Mayor Thorne, I'd like to press charges against Mr. Boone. Yesterday he assaulted me on his property, gave me the split lip as proof. I'm asking that he be arrested and charged." Sheriff Dugan sighed heavily. "Mr. Hale, I already explained to you that if you went out to Boone's property uninvited and got into an altercation, that's not assault. That's trespassing on your part and self-defense on his." "Self-defense?" Marcus's voice rose. "He hit me without provocation. I was simply trying to talk to my sister-in-law." "Your former sister-in-law," Eva corrected sharply. "And you were on private property, making accusations and insults. Silas defended my honor, which is exactly what any decent man would do." "Your honor?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Eva, you threw away your honor the moment you moved in with him. And now you've married him out of— what? Desperation? Fear? Do you really think this changes anything? Do you really think anyone here believes this marriage is anything other than a legal fiction to cover up what you've already been doing?" Silas moved so fast that Eva barely had time to register it. One moment he was standing beside her. The next, he had Marcus by the collar, lifting him nearly off his feet. "Listen to me very carefully," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. "That woman is my wife. And if you ever speak about her that way again, split lip will be the least of your problems. Do we understand each other?" "Silas," Sheriff Dugan said warningly, "put him down."
For a moment, Eva thought Silas might actually hit Marcus again. She could see the rage in every line of his body, the way his muscles tensed and his jaw clenched. But then he seemed to get control of himself. He released Marcus with enough force to send him stumbling backward. "Stay away from my property," Silas said. "Stay away from my wife. If I see you near our home again, I won't be so restrained." "Is that a threat?" Marcus demanded, straightening his coat. "Sheriff, you heard that. He threatened me." "What I heard," Sheriff Dugan said tiredly, "was a man telling you to stay off his land. Which is his right, Mr. Hale. Now, I suggest you all go home and let these newlyweds get on with their lives. This drama is getting old." "I agree with the sheriff," Reverend Mills said, stepping forward. He'd been watching from the church steps, and now he moved to stand beside Eva and Silas. "I just performed a marriage ceremony for these two people. A legal, binding marriage in the eyes of God and the state. Whatever happened before today is between them and their consciences. But as of now, they are husband and wife, and they deserve to be treated with the respect that any married couple deserves." "Thank you, Reverend," Eva said quietly. "Mrs. D." Thorne looked like she wanted to argue further, but Mayor Thorne put a hand on her arm. "Come along, Delilah. Let's go home." "This isn't over," Mrs. Thorne said, glaring at Eva. "Mark my words, this marriage won't last. And when it falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to this town for help." "I wouldn't dream of it," Eva said. "This town has made it abundantly clear what it thinks of me. But you know what, Mrs. Thorne? I don't need your help or your approval. I have a husband who loves me, and a home that's more real than any of you could possibly understand, so you can keep your judgment and your gossip. I don't want any part of it." She turned to Silas, who was watching her with something like awe in his eyes. "Can we go home now?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Let's go home." They climbed into the wagon, and Silas took up the reins. As they pulled away from the church, Eva heard voices rising behind them, arguments and exclamations and shocked whispers. But she didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward, on the road ahead, on the future she'd just chosen. Silas reached over and took her hand, and Eva laced her fingers through his, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the wedding ring on her finger. "That was quite a show," Silas said after they'd left the town behind. "You were magnificent." "I was terrified," Eva admitted, "but also angry. So angry, Silas, the way they looked at us, the things they said. I know, but we showed them, didn't we?" He squeezed her hand. "We showed them all." They rode in silence for a while, the prairie spreading out on all sides, endless and free. Eva felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years, like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't even know was there. They rode in silence for a while, the prairie spreading out on all sides, endless and free. Eva felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years, like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't even know was there, and suddenly it was gone. "Do you regret it?" Silas asked quietly. "Marrying me so fast? Standing up to all those people?" Eva looked at him, at his scarred face and worried eyes and the hands that held the reins with such capable strength. She thought about the cabin waiting for them, about the life they'd build together, about the fact that she was married again, and it felt nothing like the first time. It felt better, truer, like she'd finally found where she was meant to be. "Not for a second," she said. "Do you?" "Not for a second," he echoed, and the smile he gave her was bright enough to rival the sun. They reached the cabin as the afternoon light was starting to fade, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Silas helped Eva down from the wagon, and they stood there for a moment in the yard, just looking at each other, the magnitude of what they'd done settling over them. "So," Eva said, "I suppose I should ask, where do I sleep now?" Silas laughed, that rusty sound she'd come to love, and pulled her close. "Right here," he said, echoing the words he'd said that first night. But this time he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Right here with me, always, always," Eva agreed and let him lead her inside. The cabin looked the same as it had that morning, but everything felt different. This wasn't Silas's cabin anymore, or Rebecca's cabin, or even a temporary shelter for a stranded stranger. This was their home, Eva's and Silas's, a place they'd build together, starting right now. "I love you," Silas said, pulling her close. "I know I already said it, but I need you to know, I love you, Eva Boone."
and I'm going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "Eva Boone," she repeated, testing out the name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the cottonwood trees and carrying the smell of prairie grass and creek water and the promise of coming winter.
But inside the cabin, there was only warmth and lamplight, and two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen love over propriety and hope over fear. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Marcus might make good on his threats. Mrs. Thorne would certainly continue her campaign of gossip and judgment. The whole town would be talking about their hasty marriage, speculating about their motives, making assumptions. But tomorrow was tomorrow. Tonight, Eva was exactly where she wanted to be, in Silas's arms, in their home, starting the life she'd chosen. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The first week of marriage passed in a blur of domestic routine and stolen moments of happiness. Eva woke each morning to find Silas already awake, watching her with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. They worked side by side during the day, mending fences, tending animals, preparing for the harsh winter everyone said was coming. And at night, they lay together in the bed that had once been Silas's alone, talking until the fire burned low and sleep finally claimed them. It should have been perfect. In many ways, it was. But Eva couldn't shake the feeling that they were living in borrowed time, that the peace they'd found was too fragile to last. She was proven right on the 8th day. The first snow came early that year, dusting the prairie in white and dropping the temperature so fast that Eva could see her breath inside the cabin when she woke. Silas was already up, feeding the fire, and he turned when he heard her stirring. "Morning, Mrs. Boone," he said, and the warmth in his voice made her forget about the cold. "Morning yourself, Mr. Boone." Eva wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and moved to stand beside him at the fire. "Is it always this cold here?" "This is nothing. Wait until January." He put his arm around her, pulling her close. "But don't worry, this cabin's solid. We'll be warm enough." They were finishing breakfast when they heard the sound of approaching horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. Silas's expression darkened, and he moved to the window, peering out through the frost-rimmed glass. "Who is it?" Eva asked, already knowing in her gut that whoever it was, they weren't bringing good news. "Sheriff Dugan. And he's not alone." Silas's jaw tightened. "Looks like he brought half the town with him." Eva moved to stand beside him, and her heart sank at the sight. There were at least a dozen men on horseback, Sheriff Dugan in the lead, and behind them a wagon that looked ominously official. Marcus Hale was there, she saw, and Mayor Thorne, and several other men whose faces she recognized from town. "Stay inside," Silas said, reaching for his coat. "Let me handle this." "No." Eva grabbed his arm. "Whatever this is, we face it together. Remember?" He looked like he wanted to argue, but then he nodded. "Together. But Eva, if things go bad, if they try to take me, you run. You hear me? You get on a horse and you ride to the Reverend's house and you don't look back." "Silas, what are you talking about? Take you where?" But he was already opening the door, stepping out onto the porch. Eva followed, wrapping her shawl tight against the bitter wind. Sheriff Dugan dismounted, his expression grim. "Boone. Mrs. Boone, I'm sorry about this, but I've got a warrant here. Need to search your property." "A warrant?" Silas's voice was dangerously calm. "On what grounds?" "Mr. Hale here has made some serious allegations." Dugan pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Claims you've been rustling cattle from the Circle H ranch. Says he has witnesses who saw you driving branded cattle onto your property 3 nights ago." Eva felt the blood drain from her face. Cattle rustling was a hanging offense in this territory. Everyone knew that. "That's a lie," Silas said flatly. "I've never stolen a head of cattle in my life." "Then you won't mind us taking a look around," Marcus said, stepping forward with a smug expression. "If you're innocent, you have nothing to hide." "This is about yesterday, isn't it?" Eva said, her voice shaking with anger. "About what happened at the church. You're trying to get revenge." "This is about justice," Marcus said, "and about protecting the good people of this territory from thieves and criminals." "Let me see that warrant," Silas said, holding out his hand. Sheriff Dugan handed it over, and Silas read it carefully, his expression growing darker with each line.
This says you have the right to search my property and seize any stolen cattle you find. It also says if you find evidence of rustling, I'm to be arrested and held for trial. That's correct, Dugan said, and he actually looked uncomfortable. Look, Boone, I don't want to do this, but the law's the law. Mr. Hale filed a formal complaint, and Judge Harrison issued the warrant. My hands are tied.
Then let's get this over with, Silas said. Search wherever you want. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find. The men spread out across the property, some heading to the barn, others to the corral, still others checking the far pastures where Silas's cattle grazed. Eva and Silas stood on the porch, watching in silence as strangers pawed through their belongings, their life, looking for evidence of a crime that had never been committed. They're not going to find anything, Eva said quietly, more to reassure herself than anything. They can't find what doesn't exist. But Silas's expression was troubled. You don't know Marcus like I'm starting to. He didn't come all the way out here just to make empty accusations. He's planning something. 20 minutes later, one of the men called out from the north pasture, his voice carrying clear in the cold air. Sheriff, you better come see this. Eva's stomach dropped. Silas's hand found hers, gripping tight, and together they followed Sheriff Dugan and the others across the snow-dusted grass to where a cluster of men stood near the creek. There, mixed in with Silas's own cattle, were 6 head bearing a different brand, a circle with an H inside it. The Circle H brand, exactly what Marcus had accused Silas of stealing. Well, well, Marcus said, his voice dripping with false surprise. Looks like we found our missing cattle. Sheriff, I believe you have an arrest to make. No, Eva said, her voice high and desperate. No, this is impossible. Silas didn't steal those cattle. He couldn't have. He's been with me every night, every day. There's no way. Mrs. Boone, Sheriff Dugan said gently, you're his wife. Your testimony about his whereabouts isn't going to carry much weight. But it's the truth. Eva turned to Silas, searching his face for answers. You didn't do this. Tell them you didn't do this. I didn't. Silas's voice was steady, but Eva could see the fear in his eyes. I've never seen those cattle before in my life. Someone put them there. Someone framed me. That's convenient, Marcus said. Blame some mysterious someone when you get caught red-handed. You did this, Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. You planted those cattle here. You're trying to frame me. That's a serious accusation, Boone, Mayor Thorne said, stepping forward. Do you have any proof? Do you? Silas shot back. All you have is cattle in my pasture. That doesn't prove I stole them. Anyone could have driven them here. But they didn't, did they? Marcus's smile was cruel. They're here, on your property, bearing my family's brand. That's all the proof the law needs. Sheriff Dugan sighed heavily. Silas Boone, I'm placing you under arrest for cattle rustling. You have the right to— But no! Eva threw herself between Silas and the sheriff. You can't do this. He's innocent. Please, you have to believe me. Eva, don't. Silas's hands came to her shoulders, gently moving her aside. It's all right. We'll sort this out in court. I haven't done anything wrong. The truth will come out. Will it? Eva's eyes were burning with tears. Silas, they hang cattle rustlers. They're going to kill you for something you didn't do. Not if I can help it. Silas cupped her face in his hands, his touch impossibly gentle. Listen to me. You ride into town tomorrow and find the Reverend. Tell him what happened. He'll know who to contact. There's a territorial judge who sometimes passes through, man named Carson. He's honest. He'll listen. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Silas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You have to be strong now, Eva. Can you do that for me? Can you be strong? I don't want to be strong, Eva sobbed. I want you. Boone, we need to go, Sheriff Dugan said quietly. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Silas let his hands fall from Eva's face, and she watched in horror as the sheriff pulled out handcuffs, locking them around Silas's wrists. The metal clicked shut with a sound like a death knell. What about the cattle? One of the men asked. The stolen ones? Drive them back to the Circle H, Marcus said. They're my family's property. As for Boone's herd,
He looked at Eva with undisguised malice. I suppose they belong to his widow now, or they will soon enough. Don't you dare, Eva said, her voice shaking with rage. Don't you dare threaten him. Don't you dare stand there and gloat about framing an innocent man. Careful, Mrs.
Boone, Mayor Thorne said. Accusing Mr. Hale of a crime without proof is slander. You could find yourself in legal trouble as well. I don't care about legal trouble. Eva turned to face the assembled men, these men who were taking her husband away based on lies and planted evidence. I know my husband is innocent, and I know someone put those cattle there to frame him. When the truth comes out, and it will, every single one of you will be ashamed of what you did here today. No one responded. They just stood there in the snow, looking uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge the evidence before them. Sheriff Dugan led Silas toward his horse, and Eva followed, her hand clutching at Silas's sleeve. I'll fix this, she said desperately. I'll find proof. I'll find witnesses. You'll stay safe, Silas said firmly. That's what you'll do. Don't do anything dangerous, Eva. Promise me. I can't promise that. Then promise me you'll be careful. They'd reached the sheriff's horse, and Dugan was preparing to help Silas mount. Promise me you won't give up. Never, Eva said fiercely. I won't give up on you. I won't give up on us. Silas managed to lean down despite the handcuffs, pressing one last kiss to her lips. I love you, Eva Boone. Remember that, no matter what happens. I love you too. Then the sheriff was leading him away, and Eva stood in the snow watching her husband disappear into the distance, surrounded by men who believed him to be a criminal. Marcus rode past her, close enough that she could have reached out and touched his stirrup, and he looked down at her with satisfaction clear in every line of his face. You should have come with me when you had the chance, he said. Now you're going to be a widow twice over. Such a shame. If anything happens to him, Eva said, her voice cold as the winter wind, I will spend the rest of my life making you pay for it. That's not a threat, Marcus. That's a promise. Something flickered in his expression, unease maybe, or the first hint of doubt. But then he spurred his horse forward, following the others back toward town, and Eva was left standing alone in her yard as the snow began to fall in earnest. She didn't know how long she stood there, watching the empty horizon, her body numb with cold and shock. Eventually, the shaking started, great violent tremors that had nothing to do with the temperature. She stumbled back to the cabin and collapsed just inside the door, her strength finally giving out. This couldn't be happening. 2 weeks ago, she'd been desperate and alone, and Silas had saved her. He'd given her shelter and kindness and love. And now, when she'd finally found something worth holding on to, it was being ripped away. But Eva hadn't survived Thomas's death and her in-laws' cruelty and months of desperate poverty just to give up now. Silas had asked her to be strong, and that's exactly what she was going to be. She pulled herself together, wiping her eyes and setting her jaw with determination. She had work to do. The next morning, Eva rode into town on one of Silas's horses. She'd never been comfortable on horseback, but she'd learned enough in her time at the cabin to manage. The 8-mile journey felt like 80. Every minute stretched thin with anxiety and fear. Reverend Mills was in his study when she arrived, and his face creased with concern when he saw her. Mrs. Boone, I heard about what happened. I'm so terribly sorry. Don't be sorry, Eva said. Help me. Silas said you'd know how to contact Judge Carson. I do, but Eva... The Reverend gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. Judge Carson is 3 days' ride from here, and he won't be back through this territory for at least 2 weeks. The trial is scheduled for 5 days from now. There's no way to reach him in time. Eva felt her hope crumbling, but she refused to let it show. Then who else? Who else can help? I've already sent a telegram to the territorial attorney asking for an investigation into the charges. But these things take time, and time is the one thing we don't have, Eva interrupted. Reverend, you know Silas. You married us. Do you honestly believe he's capable of stealing cattle? No, the Reverend said without hesitation. I don't. Silas Boone is a good man, but Eva, believing in his innocence and proving it are two very different things. Then help me prove it. There has to be something we can do. Over the next hour, they discussed possibilities. Eva told him about Marcus's threats, about the confrontation after the wedding, about her certainty that this was revenge rather than justice. The Reverend listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions. The problem, he said finally, is that we need proof. We need to show either that Silas couldn't have stolen the cattle or that someone else did. Do you have any idea who might have helped Mr. Hale frame your husband? Eva thought hard. Marcus wouldn't have done this alone. He wasn't from this territory, didn't know the land. He would have needed help from someone local, someone with a grudge against Silas, or someone he could pay. Mrs. Thorne, Eva said suddenly. She hates both of us. And her husband is the mayor. He has influence, connections. What if Marcus made a deal with them? That's possible, but again, proof. We need evidence, not just suspicions. Eva left the Reverend's house feeling defeated but not destroyed. She spent the rest of the day in town talking to anyone who would listen, asking questions, trying to find someone who'd seen something or knew something that could help. Most people avoided her, crossing the street when they saw her coming, closing doors in her face. The wife of an accused cattle rustler wasn't welcome company, but Mrs. Patterson, the store owner's wife, pulled Eva aside as she was leaving the general store. I don't know if this helps, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. But 3 nights ago, the night those cattle supposedly got moved, I couldn't sleep. Restless, you know. And I heard riders going past, heading north out of town. Must have been around midnight, at least 4 or 5 horses, maybe more. Did you see who they were? Too dark, but I remember thinking it was odd people riding out that late. Nothing good happens at midnight, my mother always said. It wasn't much, but it was something. Eva thanked her and continued her inquiries. By the time she rode back to the cabin that evening, she'd gathered scraps of information. A ranch hand who'd seen Marcus talking to some rough-looking men at the saloon, a woman who'd heard Mayor Thorne arguing with his wife about doing what was necessary, a blacksmith who'd noticed fresh tracks leading toward Silas's property the morning of the arrest. None of it was proof, but together it painted a picture of conspiracy. That night, alone in the cabin that still smelled like Silas, Eva sat at the table and wrote out everything she knew. Every conversation, every suspicious detail, every piece of the puzzle. She wrote until her hand cramped and her eyes burned with exhaustion. Somewhere out there, Silas was sitting in a jail cell, probably thinking she'd given up or run away. But Eva had meant what she'd said. She wasn't giving up. Not on him. Not on them. Not on the life they'd barely begun to build together. The next 3 days passed in a blur of desperate activity. Eva rode between the cabin and town multiple times each day, gathering information, talking to anyone who might help, slowly building a case for Silas's innocence. She visited him once in jail. The sheriff allowed her 15 minutes, standing just outside the cell door. Silas looked terrible. His face was bruised, and when Eva asked about it, he just shook his head. Some of the other prisoners don't like being locked up with an accused thief. It's fine. I've had worse. This isn't fine. None of this is fine. Eva reached through the bars to take his hand. But I'm making progress. I found people who saw riders that night, who can testify that Marcus had been meeting with suspicious men. It's not enough yet, but Eva, stop. Silas squeezed her hand. You need to accept that this might not end the way we want. If I'm convicted, you won't be. If I am, he continued firmly, I need you to promise me something. Take whatever you can from the cabin, money, horses, supplies, and leave. Go to California, go back east, go anywhere but here. Start over somewhere far away from the Thorns and the Hales and all of this. I'm not leaving you. Eva, no. She gripped his hand tighter. You asked me to be strong, and I am. But I'm not strong enough to walk away and let them hang you for something you didn't do. So we're going to fight this, Silas. We're going to fight it with everything we have. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw love and pride and terrible sadness in his eyes. How did I get so lucky? He said softly. We both got lucky. We found each other. Eva pressed his hand to her cheek. And we're not going to lose each other now. I won't let it happen. On the 4th day, Eva was at the cabin feeding the animals when she heard a horse approaching. She grabbed the rifle Silas kept by the door. She'd been practicing with it, just in case, and stepped out onto the porch. The rider was a woman,
young and pretty despite her obvious exhaustion. It took Eva a moment to recognize her. Emily Thorne, Mrs. Thorne's daughter, the girl who'd been with her mother that day at the general store. "Mrs. Boone," Emily called out, dismounting. "Please, I need to talk to you. It's about the trial." Eva kept the rifle pointed down but didn't set it aside. "What about it?" "Can I come inside? Please? What I have to say. It's important, and I don't want anyone to see me here." Against her better judgment, Eva let the girl inside. Emily was shaking, though whether from cold or nerves, Eva couldn't tell. She refused the offer of coffee, pacing the small cabin instead. "I don't have much time. Mother thinks I'm at the dressmaker's. If she finds out I came here—" Emily stopped, taking a deep breath. "Mrs. Boone, my mother is planning something terrible." Eva's heart started racing. "What kind of something?" "She's been meeting with Mr. Hale. They've been planning this whole thing, the cattle, the arrest, all of it. I overheard them talking 3 nights ago. Mr. Hale paid some men to drive those cattle onto your property while you and Mr. Boone were asleep. He wanted revenge for what happened at the church, and Mother wanted you both punished for defying her." It was what Eva had suspected, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. "Will you testify to this? At the trial?" Emily's face crumpled. "I can't. Don't you see? If I testify against my mother, if I betray her like that, she'll never forgive me. Father will disown me. I'll have nothing, nowhere to go." "But an innocent man is going to hang—" "I know." Emily's voice broke. "I know, and it's eating me alive. That's why I came here. I thought maybe if I told you, you could use the information somehow. Find a way to prove it without me having to testify." Eva wanted to scream at her, to shake her and make her understand that information without testimony was useless in court. But she could see the genuine anguish in Emily's face, could understand the impossible position the girl was in. "Is there anything else?" Eva asked, forcing her voice to stay calm. "Anything that could help prove what they did?" Emily thought for a moment. "The men Mr. Hale hired, they were from out of town. Drifters, I think. Mother paid them with money from Father's safe. She took $200 in gold coins. Father noticed it missing, and she told him she'd donated it to the church, but she didn't. She gave it to those men." "Can you prove that? The money being taken?" "Father keeps a ledger. It would show the withdrawal. But I can't be the one to bring it forward." Eva's mind was racing. A ledger showing missing money, combined with the testimony of witnesses who'd seen Marcus with rough men, combined with the suspicious timing of everything, it might be enough. It had to be enough. "Thank you," Eva said quietly. "I know what it cost you to come here." Emily nodded, already moving toward the door. "I'm sorry I can't do more. I'm sorry I'm such a coward." "You're not a coward. You're just afraid. There's a difference." After Emily left, Eva immediately rode back to town. She found Reverend Mills and told him everything Emily had said. Together, they drafted a new strategy for the trial: circumstantial evidence, suspicious timing, the mayor's missing gold, witness testimony about Marcus's meetings with strangers. "It's thin," the Reverend said honestly, "but it might be enough to create reasonable doubt. If the jury believes that someone could have framed Silas, they might not convict." "Might not isn't good enough," Eva said, "but it's all we have." The trial was held on the 5th day in the town hall that doubled as a courthouse when the circuit judge came through. Judge Harrison was an older man with iron-gray hair and a reputation for being tough but fair. Eva sat in the front row, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Silas was brought in wearing handcuffs, his face still bruised from the jail fight. When his eyes found Eva's, she saw him relax slightly, drawing strength from her presence the way she was drawing strength from his. The prosecutor, a young lawyer named Daniels, laid out the case against Silas. Cattle bearing the Circle H brand found on Silas's property. No alibi except his wife's testimony. A history of living alone, of being strange and difficult, the kind of man who might turn to crime. "The evidence is clear," Daniels said to the jury. "Silas Boone is a cattle rustler, and the law requires that he pay the penalty for his crime." Then it was their turn. Reverend Mills had found a lawyer willing to defend Silas.
An older man named Garrett, who'd known Silas's neighbor, the one who'd stitched up his face after the accident. Garrett was methodical and careful, building a case piece by piece. He called Mrs. Patterson to the stand, who testified about the riders she'd heard that night. He called the ranch hand who'd seen Marcus meeting with strangers. He called Eva, who testified that Silas had been with her every night, that there was no way he could have moved those cattle without her knowing. Mrs. Boone, Daniels said during cross-examination, "You love your husband, don't you?" "Of course I do." "And you'd say anything to protect him, wouldn't you?" "I'd tell the truth to protect him," Eva said firmly. "Which is what I'm doing now." The trial dragged on for hours. Witnesses testified, evidence was presented, arguments were made. Through it all, Eva watched the jury's faces, trying to read their expressions, trying to gauge whether they believed Silas was innocent or guilty. Finally, as the afternoon light was fading, both sides rested their cases. Judge Harrison instructed the jury, and they filed out to deliberate. The wait was agony. Eva sat on the hard bench, her hand clasped in Reverend Mills, praying harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. Silas sat at the defendant's table, his face unreadable, but Eva could see the tension in his shoulders. An hour passed. Then 2. The light outside the windows faded to darkness, and lamps were lit inside the town hall. People whispered and shifted restlessly. Eva felt like she might shatter from the strain. Finally, the jury filed back in. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Harrison asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman said. He was a farmer named McKinley, a man Eva had spoken to briefly during her investigation. She thought he seemed sympathetic, but she couldn't tell now from his expression what the verdict was. In the case of the Territory versus Silas Boone, on the charge of cattle rustling, how do you find? Eva held her breath. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. "We find the defendant." McKinley paused, and Eva wanted to scream at him to just say it, to end this terrible suspense. "Not guilty." The room erupted. Eva heard herself crying out, but she couldn't hear her own voice over the sudden chaos. She was pushing through the crowd, not caring who she knocked aside, desperate to get to Silas. She saw him stand, saw the disbelief on his face, saw the moment it transformed into joy. They met in the middle of the room, Eva throwing herself into his arms hard enough to nearly knock them both over. He was still wearing handcuffs, but he wrapped his arms around her as best he could, holding her tight while she sobbed against his chest. "It's over," he said into her hair. "Eva, it's over. We won." But even as he said it, Eva heard Marcus Hale's voice rising above the crowd. "This is a travesty. Judge Harrison, this jury has been deceived. That man is guilty, and everyone knows it. I demand—" "You'll demand nothing," Judge Harrison said sharply. "The jury has spoken. Mr. Boone is a free man. Sheriff, remove those handcuffs." Sheriff Dugan stepped forward and unlocked the cuffs, and Silas rubbed his wrist gratefully. Then he cupped Eva's face in his hands and kissed her, right there in front of everyone, and Eva didn't care who saw or what they thought. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd won. But as they left the town hall, walking into the cold night air, Eva saw Marcus standing with Mrs. Thorne. The looks on their faces promised that while they might have lost this battle, the war wasn't over. Eva squeezed Silas's hand and kept walking. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. They'd already survived the worst, or so she thought. She had no way of knowing that the real test was still to come. The ride home from town that night felt different from every other journey Eva had made along that road. Silas held the reins with one hand, his other arm wrapped around Eva's shoulders, pulling her close against the November cold. The stars were brilliant overhead, sharp and clear in the frozen air, and Eva felt like she could finally breathe again after 5 days of suffocating fear. "I can't believe it's over," she said quietly, her head resting against Silas's shoulder. "I kept thinking something would go wrong, that they'd find some way to—" "But they didn't," Silas interrupted gently. "You saved me, Eva. You and the Reverend and everyone who was willing to speak up. You didn't give up." "I told you I wouldn't." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I know. I should have trusted that from the start." They reached the cabin well after midnight, both exhausted beyond words. Silas tended to the horse while Eva got the fire going, and then they simply held each other in the warmth, not speaking, just grateful to be together and alive and free.
But even as Eva drifted off to sleep in Silas's arms, she couldn't shake the memory of Marcus's face as they'd left the town hall. The rage, the promise of retribution. This wasn't over, no matter what the jury had decided. She was right. The first few weeks after the trial passed quietly, almost too quietly. Silas threw himself into preparing for winter with an intensity that bordered on obsession, checking and rechecking the fences, laying in extra supplies, making sure every crack in the cabin walls was sealed against the cold. Eva helped where she could, but she also watched him, seeing the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the way he startled at unexpected sounds. "You're worried Marcus will try something else," she said one afternoon as they were stacking firewood. Silas didn't deny it. Men like that don't forgive being beaten, especially not in public, in front of the whole town. "So what do? We stay alert, we watch our backs, and we make sure we're ready for whatever comes." He straightened, looking at her seriously. "Eva, I need you to learn to shoot properly, not just knowing where the trigger is, but really shoot. Hit what you're aiming at." Over the next week, Silas taught Eva to handle both the rifle and his pistol. She'd never been comfortable with guns, but she practiced until her shoulder ached from the rifle's kick and her hands were steady on the pistol's grip. Silas was a patient teacher, and by the end of the week, Eva could hit a tin can at 20 paces more often than not. "Good," Silas said, watching her reload. "That's good. I feel better knowing you can protect yourself if I'm not here." "Where would you be?" "I don't know, but I want you prepared for anything." Winter arrived in earnest in early December, bringing snow that piled against the cabin walls and temperatures that made Eva's teeth chatter even inside by the fire. They were snowed in for days at a time, able to tend the animals only by following rope lines Silas had strung between the cabin and the barn. It was harsh and isolating, but Eva found she didn't mind. The world contracted to just the two of them, to their small, warm cabin and the love they were building inside it. They talked during those long winter nights, really talked, about everything and nothing. Silas told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about his father's lumber mill and the forest that had seemed endless when he was small, about how he'd met Rebecca at a church social, how she'd laughed at his terrible jokes and agreed to marry him despite his rough edges. "Does it bother you?" Eva asked one night. "That I'm here in the home you built for her?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "At first I thought it would. But Eva, you're not trying to replace her. You're not trying to be her. You're just you, and that's what I love. Rebecca was my first love, and she'll always have that place in my heart. But you're my second chance at life, at happiness. There's room for both." Eva understood. She felt the same way about Thomas. He would always be her first love, the boy she'd married full of hope and dreams. But Silas was her second chance, her unexpected gift, and she loved him with a depth that surprised her. "I'm glad I got stranded here," she said softly. "I'm glad the stagecoach broke down. I'm glad Mrs. Crowley turned me away, because all of it led me to you." "I'm glad I went to town that day," Silas replied. "I almost didn't. Almost decided the supplies could wait another week, but something made me go, and there you were." "Fate," Eva said. "Maybe, or maybe just dumb luck. Either way, I'll take it." Christmas came and went quietly. They had no decorations beyond some pine branches Eva cut and arranged on the mantel. No gifts beyond the ones they made for each other. Eva sewed Silas a new shirt from fabric she'd been saving, and Silas carved her a beautiful wooden box with flowers etched into the lid. It was simple and perfect, and Eva thought it might be the best Christmas she'd ever had. The new year arrived with a blizzard that lasted 3 days. They were completely cut off from the world, just two people in a cabin surrounded by endless white. On the second night, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled within, Eva realized something that made her heart race with joy and terror in equal measure. "Silas," she said carefully, "think I might be pregnant." He froze in the act of adding wood to the fire, then slowly turned to face her. "You think?" "I'm almost certain. I'm late, and I've been feeling sick in the mornings, and—" She touched her stomach gently. "I can't explain it, but I just know. There's a baby." For a moment, Silas just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile Eva had ever seen on him.
He crossed the room in 3 long strides and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite the limited space. "We're going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Eva, we're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Eva asked, even though she could see that he was. "Happy? I don't even have words for what I am." He set her down carefully, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. A baby. Our baby. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, where the cradle would go, how they'd add on to the cabin come spring to make room for a nursery, names they liked for both boys and girls. It felt surreal and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Eva was going to be a mother. They were going to be a family. But the joy of that discovery was tempered by reality. They were snowed in, miles from town, and Eva was pregnant with winter still raging around them. If something went wrong, if she had problems with the pregnancy, there would be no doctor, no midwife, no help of any kind. "We'll be all right," Silas assured her, seeing the worry in her eyes. "Women have been having babies in worse circumstances than this since the beginning of time. And come spring, we'll make sure you see a proper doctor. But for now, we just take care of you and the baby. Keep you warm and fed and safe." The blizzard finally broke on the 4th day, revealing a world transformed by snow. The prairie was an endless expanse of white, beautiful, and deadly in equal measure. Silas dug paths to the barn and chicken coop, and Eva marveled at how much snow had fallen, drifts as high as the cabin's roof in some places. "I need to check the cattle," Silas said that afternoon. "Make sure they found shelter, that none of them are in trouble. I shouldn't be gone more than a few hours." "Be careful," Eva said, helping him bundle up in his warmest coat. "Please be careful." "Always am." He kissed her soundly. "Keep the fire going and the door barred. I'll be back before dark." Eva watched from the window as he rode out, his horse picking its way carefully through the deep snow. Then she set about her usual tasks, baking bread, mending clothes, keeping the fire fed. She was just taking the bread from the oven when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her first thought was that Silas had forgotten something, but the sound was wrong. Too many horses, moving too fast. Eva's heart began to race. She set down the bread and moved to get the rifle, making sure it was loaded before positioning herself by the window. 4 riders came into view, and Eva's blood turned to ice when she recognized the man in front, Marcus Hale, bundled against the cold, leading 3 other men she didn't recognize. They pulled up in front of the cabin, and Marcus dismounted with the casual arrogance of someone who expected to be obeyed. Eva barred the door and called out through it, keeping the rifle ready. "What do you want, Marcus?" "Just to talk, Eva. Open the door." "We have nothing to talk about. The trial is over. You lost." "Is Boone here?" Marcus asked, looking around. "Or are you all alone out here?" Eva's mind raced. If she admitted Silas was gone, Marcus might try something, but if she lied and he knew she was lying, that could be worse. She settled for evasion. "What do you want, Marcus?" she repeated. "I want what's fair," Marcus called back. "Your husband made a fool of me, Eva. Him and you both. You stood up in that courtroom and lied to protect him, and the jury believed you, but I know the truth. I know he stole those cattle." "Then you know wrong. The jury found him not guilty because he is not guilty." "The jury was deceived," Marcus's voice rose with anger. "And I'm not going to let this stand. I'm not going to let you 2 get away with making me look like a liar and a fool." One of the other men spoke up, his voice rough and hard. "Boss, it's cold out here. You want us to just break down the door?" Eva raised the rifle, pointing it at the door. "The first man through this door gets shot. I promise you that." There was silence for a moment. Then Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "You hear that, boys? The little lady thinks she's going to shoot us." "I will shoot you," Eva said, putting every ounce of conviction she had into the words. "Silas taught me how. I can hit what I aim at. So unless you want to test whether I'm serious, I suggest you leave." "Where's Boone, Marcus demanded. "When will he be back?" Eva didn't answer. Let him wonder. Let him worry that Silas might ride up at any moment. "Fine," Marcus said after another pause. "We'll wait. It's warm enough in your barn. We'll just make ourselves comfortable there until your husband returns. And then we'll have our conversation." You're trespassing, Eva said. The sheriff... The sheriff is 3 hours away through snowdrifts, and by the time you could get to him, this will all be over. Marcus's voice turned cold. You should have left with me when I offered, Eva. You should have stayed away from Boone, but you made your choice, and now you're going to live with the consequences. Eva heard them moving toward the barn, heard the doors being forced open. Her hands were shaking, but she kept the rifle steady. She had to think, had to figure out what to do. Silas had said he'd be back before dark. That gave her maybe 3 hours. 3 hours to figure out how to protect herself and the baby she was carrying. 3 hours before whatever Marcus was planning came to fruition. She couldn't just hide in the cabin and wait. Marcus had brought 3 men with him, rough-looking men who clearly weren't afraid of breaking the law. Even if Silas came back, it would be 4 against 1. The odds were terrible, unless she could even them somehow. An idea began to form in Eva's mind. It was dangerous and probably foolish, but it was better than doing nothing. She checked the rifle again, made sure she had extra ammunition in her pockets, and then she did something that would have horrified her just months ago. She went on the offensive. Eva slipped out the back window of the cabin, the one Silas had installed as an escape route in case of fire. The cold hit her like a fist, but she ignored it, moving as quietly as she could through the snow toward the barn. She could hear voices inside. Marcus and his men arguing about something. She positioned herself at the side of the barn where she could see through a gap in the boards. The men were gathered around a small fire they'd built, trying to warm themselves. Their horses were tied nearby, stamping and snorting in the cold. Eva's plan was simple. If she could spook the horses, send them running, Marcus and his men would have to choose between chasing them down or staying to confront Silas. Either way, it would buy time and even the odds. She circled around to where the horses were tied, moving slowly and carefully to avoid making noise in the crunchy snow. The horses sensed her presence, ears pricking forward, but they didn't seem alarmed. Eva had spent enough time around Silas's horses to know how to move around them without causing panic. She waited until she was sure Marcus and his men were all inside the barn, distracted by their fire and their plans. Then she fired the rifle into the air. The sound was deafening in the cold stillness, and the effect was immediate. The horses reared and bucked, breaking their ties and bolting in different directions. Eva fired again, and then she was running back toward the cabin as fast as the snow would allow, her heart hammering in her chest. Behind her, she heard men shouting, heard Marcus cursing. She scrambled back through the window and slammed it shut, barring it from inside. Then she took up her position by the front door again, the rifle steady in her hands. It had worked. Through the front window, she could see Marcus and 2 of his men chasing after their horses, which had scattered across the snowy prairie. But the 3rd man, the one with the rough voice, was walking toward the cabin, and he had a gun in his hand. "That was a stupid move, lady," he called out. "Now I'm going to have to teach you a lesson about interfering." Eva's finger tightened on the trigger. She'd never shot at a person before, but she'd promised herself she would protect what was hers. This cabin, her husband, the baby growing inside her. "Stop right there," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady. "I will shoot you." The man laughed. "No, you won't. Women don't have the stomach for—" Eva fired. Not at him, but at the ground just in front of his feet. Snow and frozen dirt exploded upward, and the man jumped back with a curse. "The next one goes higher," Eva said. "Want to test me?" For a moment the man just stood there, clearly weighing his options. Then Marcus's voice rang out from somewhere behind him. "Leave her! Get the damn horses!" The man backed away slowly, keeping his eyes on the cabin, and Eva allowed herself a small breath of relief. But it was short-lived. She'd bought time, but she hadn't solved the problem. Marcus and his men were still here, and they weren't going to leave just because she'd spooked their horses. She needed Silas, needed him to come home, needed him to be safe. As if in answer to her prayer, she heard a horse approaching from the north. For one glorious moment, she thought it was Silas. But then she recognized the rider, Sheriff Dugan, riding hard through the snow, his badge glinting in the weak winter sunlight. Eva threw open the door and ran out onto the porch. "Sheriff, thank God you're here!" Dugan pulled his horse to a stop, looking around at the chaos. The scattered horses, Marcus and his men trying to round them up, Eva with a rifle in her hands. "Mrs. Boone, what in blazes is going on here?" "Marcus Hale and his men came to my property,"
Eva said quickly. They threatened me, tried to intimidate me. I defended myself. Marcus came riding up on a horse he'd finally caught, his face red with cold and anger. That's a lie, Sheriff. We came here to talk, and she started shooting at us. After you trespassed on private property and refused to leave, Eva interrupted. After you waited in my barn without permission. After you made threats. She's the one making threats. Marcus gestured at Eva's rifle.
She fired at my man. I fired at the ground near your man after he approached my home with a weapon drawn, Eva corrected. That's called self-defense, Marcus. Or did you forget that's what got Silas acquitted? Sheriff Dugan held up a hand, silencing them both. All right, that's enough. Mr. Hale, is it true you came onto this property without permission? We just wanted to talk. Is it true? Marcus's jaw clenched. Yes, but then Mrs. Boone had every right to defend herself and her property. Dugan turned to Eva. Where's your husband? Checking on the cattle. He should be back soon. Well, when he returns, tell him I need to speak with him. And Mr. Hale, the sheriff's voice turned hard. You're going to gather your men and ride back to town with me. And you're going to stay away from the Boones. You understand? I'm done with this vendetta of yours. The trial is over. Boone was found not guilty. It's time to let it go.
He's a thief. He's an innocent man according to the law, Dugan interrupted. And you're starting to look like the criminal here, Mr. Hale. Trespassing, threatening, harassment. Keep this up and you'll be the one in a jail cell. Is that what you want? Marcus looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in the sheriff's expression must have convinced him it wasn't worth it. He jerked his horse around and rode off to help his men gather the rest of their scattered mounts. It took another 20 minutes to round up all the horses. Eva stood on the porch with Sheriff Dugan, watching in silence, her rifle still at the ready. Finally, Marcus and his men were all mounted and ready to leave.
This isn't over, Eva, Marcus called out as they prepared to ride away. You can't hide behind the law forever. I'm not hiding behind anything, Eva called back. But you might want to start thinking about why you're so obsessed with destroying us. It's not about Thomas anymore, is it? It's not about justice or family honor. It's about your pride. You can't stand that we beat you. Marcus didn't answer, just spurred his horse and rode off with his men following. Sheriff Dugan watched them go, then turned to Eva. Mrs. Boone, I'm sorry about all this. For what it's worth, I think you and your husband are good people who've been dealt a bad hand, but you made some powerful enemies, and they're not going to forget. I know, Eva said quietly. But what else could we have done? Lie down and let them walk all over us? No. You did the right thing, both of you. Just be careful. Watch your backs. And if Hale or anyone else comes around again, you send for me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone. After the sheriff left, Eva went back inside the cabin and finally let herself shake. She'd held herself together through the confrontation, through the fear and the adrenaline, but now it all came crashing down. She sank into the chair by the fire and buried her face in her hands, letting the tears come. That's how Silas found her an hour later when he finally returned home. He took one look at her tear-stained face and the rifle still sitting by the door, and his expression turned to thunder. What happened? Eva told him everything: Marcus's arrival, the threats, the standoff, the sheriff's intervention. As she spoke, she watched Silas's face grow darker and darker with rage. I'm going to kill him, Silas said flatly when she finished. I'm going to ride to town right now, and I'm going to kill Marcus Hale with my bare hands. No, you're not. Eva stood and took his hands in hers. You're not going to do anything that will give them a reason to arrest you again. We're going to be smart about this, Silas. We're going to protect ourselves, but we're not going to give them ammunition. He threatened you. He came to our home and threatened my pregnant wife. And the sheriff knows it, and now there's a record of it. If anything happens to us, everyone will know who to blame. Eva squeezed his hands. We won, Silas. We beat him again. Let that be enough. But she could see in his eyes that it wasn't enough, that he wanted blood for what Marcus had done. It took her another hour of talking to calm him down, to convince him that revenge would only play into Marcus's hands. Fine, Silas said finally, but we're taking precautions, real ones. I'm going to teach you to handle that rifle even better than you already do. We're going to set up warning systems around the property, and from now on, one of us is always armed, always." Eva agreed to all of it. She was done being afraid, done letting Marcus Hale and his wounded pride control their lives. The rest of winter passed without further incident, but the tension never fully left. Silas became hypervigilant, checking the property multiple times each day, rarely venturing far from Eva's side. Eva understood. She felt the same constant low-level anxiety, the sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. But gradually, as the weeks passed and nothing happened, they began to relax. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and revealing the brown prairie beneath. Eva's pregnancy became obvious, her belly swelling with the life growing inside her. Silas was constantly hovering, treating her like she was made of glass, until Eva finally told him to stop fussing or she'd brain him with a frying pan. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said with exasperation. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I can still work. I can still help around the ranch." "I know, but—" Silas gestured helplessly. "You're carrying my child, Eva. Our child. If anything happened to you, nothing is going to happen to me." Eva took his hand and placed it on her belly, where the baby was kicking vigorously. "Feel that? That's a strong baby, a fighter, just like both of us." In April, they received unexpected news. Reverend Mills rode out to the cabin with a message. Marcus Hale had left the territory. Apparently, his attempts to ruin Silas had cost him business connections and social standing, and his family back east had recalled him, cutting off his allowance until he learned to behave responsibly. "He's gone?" Eva could hardly believe it. "Truly gone?" "Got on a train to St. Louis 3 days ago," the Reverend confirmed. "And good riddance, I say. The man caused nothing but trouble since he arrived." "What about Mrs. Thorne?" Silas asked. "Is she still making life difficult?" "Oh, she tried," the Reverend said with a slight smile. "But when it came out that she'd been involved in the frame-up, Emily finally found the courage to tell her father the truth. The mayor was livid. They've moved to Denver, said they needed a fresh start." Eva felt like a weight she'd been carrying for months had suddenly lifted. "So it's really over? They're really gone?" "It appears so. You two can finally have some peace." After the Reverend left, Eva and Silas stood in the yard, looking out over their land, and Eva felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope for the future. "We did it," she said softly. "We survived." "We did more than survive," Silas corrected, pulling her close. "We won. We built something worth having, and we protected it." The baby came in June, during a thunderstorm that made the cabin walls shake. There was no doctor, they couldn't get to town through the flooded roads, but Mrs. Wheeler, their neighbor's wife, rode over despite the weather to help. She was an experienced midwife, and she guided Eva through the long, painful hours of labor with firm efficiency. Silas waited outside, pacing in the rain like a caged animal, until Mrs. Wheeler finally called him in to meet his daughter. She was tiny and red-faced and perfect, with a cap of dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Silas took her in his arms with a wonder that made Eva's heart ache, his scarred face transformed by joy. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your father, and I promise, I'm going to protect you and love you and make sure you grow up safe and happy." "What should we name her?" Eva asked, exhausted but happier than she'd ever been. Silas thought for a moment. "Grace," he said finally, "because that's what she is. Grace we didn't earn and don't deserve, but received anyway." "Grace Boone," Eva tested the name. "I like it." Summer passed in a haze of sleepless nights and the overwhelming joy of new parenthood. They were exhausted and sometimes frustrated and completely in love with the tiny person who'd entered their lives. Eva had never imagined she could love anyone as much as she loved Grace, except maybe Silas. By fall, life had settled into a new rhythm. The ranch was thriving. Silas's cattle had multiplied, and he'd sold several horses for good prices. They had enough money saved to expand the cabin, adding 2 new rooms and a proper kitchen. It wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable and warm and theirs. One afternoon in late September, Eva was in the kitchen when she heard a wagon approaching. She tensed instinctively. Old habits died hard. But then she recognized the driver. Reverend Mills, and beside him, a woman Eva didn't know. "Mrs. Boone!" the Reverend called out cheerfully. I've brought someone to meet you. Eva wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside, Silas emerging from the barn at the sound of visitors. The woman climbing down from the wagon was tall and blonde, elegantly dressed despite the dust of travel. Eva Merritt? The woman asked, then corrected herself with a laugh. I'm sorry, Eva Boone now, I heard. I'm Martha Henderson, your cousin. I've been looking for you for months. Eva felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. Martha. Her cousin Martha, who she'd been trying to reach when the stagecoach broke down, who she'd thought had abandoned her. Here. Now. Martha? Eva's voice came out strangled. But I thought, Marcus said you'd moved to San Francisco. I did, but I moved back 6 months ago after my husband passed. I've been trying to track you down since I got your letter. Yes, it finally reached me. Took nearly a year to forward, but the trails kept going cold. I'd about given up when I ran into Reverend Mills in Denver, and he told me you were here. Martha's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Eva, I'm so sorry. If I'd known you needed help, if I'd gotten your letter sooner. It doesn't matter now, Eva said, and realized she meant it. If Martha had been in Silver Creek when Eva arrived, if everything had gone according to plan, Eva never would have met Silas, never would have built this life, never would have had Grace. Actually, she continued, moving to stand beside Silas, everything worked out exactly the way it was supposed to. She told Martha the whole story over coffee and fresh-baked bread, the broken stagecoach, the rejection in town, Silas's unexpected kindness, the whirlwind courtship, the trial, the threats, and finally the peace they'd found. Martha listened with wide eyes, occasionally exclaiming or gasping at the more dramatic parts. That's incredible, she said when Eva finished. You've been through so much, but you seem happy, truly happy. I am, Eva said simply, happier than I ever thought I could be after Thomas died. Martha stayed for dinner, meeting baby Grace and exclaiming over how beautiful she was. As the sun began to set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, Martha prepared to leave. I'm staying in Willow Junction for a few weeks, she said, setting up a new dress shop. I've saved enough money to try again. Come visit me in town. I'd love to spend more time with you, get to know my cousin properly. I'd like that, Eva said, and meant it. After Martha and Reverend Mills left, Eva and Silas stood in the yard, watching the wagon disappear into the distance. Grace was asleep in Eva's arms, her tiny face peaceful in the evening light. Funny how things work out, Silas said. If your cousin had been there when you arrived, if everything had gone according to plan, we never would have met, Eva finished. I know, I was just thinking the same thing. Do you ever regret it? Silas asked quietly. If you could go back and change things, would you? Eva looked at him, at his scarred face that she'd come to love, at the home they'd built together, at the baby in her arms who was the perfect blend of both of them. She thought about that desperate woman who'd stood in the middle of Willow Junction with 17 cents and nowhere to go, and she thought about the woman she'd become. Not for a second, she said firmly. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear, it was all worth it to end up here. With you, with Grace, with this life we've made. Silas smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his face. I love you, Eva Boone. I love you too. A year later, Eva stood in the yard of their expanded cabin, watching as Silas taught Grace to walk. The baby was tottering between his hands, laughing with pure delight every time she managed a few steps. The sound of her laughter was the sweetest thing Eva had ever heard. The whole town had turned out for their first anniversary party, not because they'd been invited, but because over the past year, Silas and Eva had slowly won over even their harshest critics. The story of their romance and their struggles had spread, taking on a life of its own, and gradually people had begun to see them not as scandalous outsiders, but as a testament to the power of love and perseverance. Mrs. Patterson was there with her husband, bringing a beautiful quilt she'd made for Grace. Several neighboring ranchers came with their families, sharing food and stories. Even Sheriff Dugan made an appearance, looking pleased that the drama had finally settled down. And Martha was there, of course, her dress shop thriving in town, her friendship with Eva growing stronger every day. She was holding Grace now, bouncing the baby on her hip while Silas prepared to make a toast. I'm not much for speeches, Silas said, holding up his glass. But I wanted to say something to my wife on our anniversary. A year ago, she walked into my life with nothing but a carpet bag and 17 cents, and she gave me everything that matters. She gave me hope when I'd forgotten what it felt like. She gave me love when I'd accepted I'd never have it again. She gave me a daughter who makes every day brighter. And she gave me the courage to fight for what we have, to protect it against anyone who'd try to take it away. He turned to Eva, and she saw tears shining in his eyes. You saved my life, Eva Boone. In every way a person can be saved, and I'm going to spend the rest of my days trying to deserve you. Eva crossed to him, tears streaming down her own face, and kissed him in front of everyone. The guests cheered and applauded, and Grace shrieked with baby laughter, and Eva felt her heart so full she thought it might burst. Later that evening, after all the guests had left and Grace was asleep in her cradle, Eva and Silas sat on the porch watching the sunset. The same sunset they'd watched that first night, when Eva had been a stranger seeking shelter and Silas had been a lonely man who'd offered it. Remember when you asked me where I should sleep? Eva said, leaning against Silas's shoulder. I remember. His arm came around her, pulling her close. What made you think of that? Because you gave me the same answer then that you'd give me now. Silas smiled, understanding. He stood and pulled her to her feet, leading her inside their warm, welcoming home, the home they'd built together through trials and tribulations, through love and determination, through faith in each other when the whole world seemed against them. At the doorway, Eva paused and looked back at the prairie, at the endless sky painted with the colors of sunset. She thought about the woman she'd been, desperate, afraid, lost. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, loved, found. Where do I sleep now? She asked, echoing that first night, teasing. Silas grinned, pulling her close, his scarred face beautiful in the fading light. Right here, he said